Chapter 174. 2 days after Ashes left, Maggie unexpectedly returned to Border Town and once again appeared in front of everyone. After finding out the reason, her return was warmly welcomed, and the Witch Union had a new member. What moved her greatly was that the welcome banquet was held in the castle's back garden. On a long iron shelf, hung all kinds of meat, which could be taken down and roasted at will. The seasonings were also very rich, including salt, oil, chili powder, pepper, and the barbecue sauce prepared by Roland himself. It was stewed with mushrooms from the concealing forest and a whole chicken, and then mixed with salt, sugar and wheat flour, which could make up for the regret of not having MSG. Maggie almost ate until her stomach was full. In the afternoon, Roland tested her ability. According to Nightingale's judgment, her total magic capacity was at an average level among the witches, and her ability was to change into a variety of birds, provided that she had seen them before. The magic consumption was quite large, and she could continuously change 4 to 5 times a day. Maintaining the state of transformation consumed very little magic. It was a summoning ability, which was affected by the god's stone of retaliation. Her favorite bird was pigeon, but Roland noticed that no matter what kind of bird she changed into, her body would be a lot bigger. For example, a sparrow, in his opinion, was the same size as an ordinary pigeon. As for a pigeon, it was almost the size of a sea eagle. Maggie could not change into the imaginary flying beasts, such as the phoenix, griffin, and kuanpeng that Roland had drawn, which made him feel quite regretful. In addition, Ash's plan was also worth his attention, and that was, what kind of abilities did the numerous witches that Tilly had gathered? If there were assistant witches that could greatly improve the efficiency of farming, he did not mind exchanging their skills. For this reason, Roland decided to write a long letter to Tilly, first explaining the natural alliance between the two sides, then warning her of the Church's intention to unify the continent, and finally extending an olive branch, expressing his desire to cooperate and make progress together. When Maggie went to the fjords next month, he would let her take her there. The next day, the prince received another good news. The construction of the factory for the production of the steam engine was finally completed. The factory was located on the other side of the Redwater River, on the west side, next to Leaf's experimental field. The entire plot of land had been surrounded by wooden fences, and a simple road leading to the side of the pontoon bridge had been leveled. According to Roland's plan, this place would be the town's industrial park. In order to expand the building space as much as possible, the factory was built with lighter wood, covering an area of about 1,000 square meters. The machine tools made by Anna had already been transported in. There were 2 steam boring machines, 2 manual milling machines, 1 manual grinding machine, and 1 manual lathe. Although the principle of these machines was simple, the workmanship was first class. Other than the base or pedals, which were made of wood, the other parts were made of wrought iron or steel. It could be said that with the current level of materials, they had achieved the highest precision of processing. At present, there were only a pitiful dozen workers in the factory. They were originally blacksmiths and apprentices of the town's blacksmith shop, but now they were recruited by Roland with a high monthly salary of 50 silver royals to learn how to operate high-end machine tools. Their smithing tools and blacksmith shop had also been moved to a brick building outside the factory. In addition to making some unimportant parts, the production of the steam engine would all be completed by machine tools. Roland held a ribbon-cutting ceremony at the entrance of the factory. In order to strengthen the momentum, he summoned a group of officials from City Hall and gave a short speech. In the midst of Echo's simulated gun salute, the establishment of Greycastle Industries was officially announced. In the next few days, as the head of the company, Roland would run to the factory whenever he had free time, personally demonstrating the operation of the machine tools, as well as the manufacturing process of the steam engine. In order to let the illiterate blacksmiths master how to process and assemble a steam engine, the best way he could think of was to illustrate the process, similar to the assembly manual of a model, indicating the name, number, and size of the parts one by one, and then depicting their installation order and connection method in the form of a diagram. In this regard, Soroya helped him a lot. In the first few days of production, as he had expected, almost none of the parts met the requirements, let alone putting together a complete steam engine. However, Roland did not care about the failure rate. In the hands of Anna, these defective parts could be recast into new plates in the blink of an eye. He believed that after repeated practice, these blacksmiths would master the production methods of the new era sooner or later. In addition to the industrial factory, the prince transformed the firing room of the North Slope mine, together with the backyard, into a military factory, mainly for the production of revolving rifles and bullets. After the arrival of the furnace expert, Lozia, who was recommended by Carr, in Border Town, the temperature of the new batch of blast air bags had greatly increased, and they could independently fire cement powder, so there was no longer a need for the firing room to exist. However, due to the limitations of the technology, the production of revolving rifles and bullets was still completed by Anna. Roland was designing a steam punch for stamping bullets. Although the efficiency was not as good as Anna's cutting and molding, at least it could reduce her burden. In order to thank Anna for her busy work in the past 2 weeks, he decided to give her a gift. A gift? Anna put down the cut parts in her hands, smoothed the hair that had slipped to her forehead, and showed a bright smile. Okay. Aren't you going to ask what the gift is? Roland teased her. Well. She thought for a moment. I like all the gifts you give me. After more than half a year of recuperation, there was no trace of the first time he saw Anna in the dungeon. She was thin and weak, but now she was slim and graceful. Her blue eyes were full of spirit, her plain dress looked fresh and neat, and her whole body was full of youthful vitality. This was what an 18-year-old girl should look like. Seeing the other side couldn't help but raise the corner of the mouth. Roland's mood became a lot better. The gift was placed in the castle courtyard, and in order to surprise Anna, it was also covered with a layer of linen. When he was making the messenger of ashes, he had this idea in his mind. Since he was a prince, the gift naturally had to be special, like jewelry and the like. Finished products would seem too insincere. He thought for a long time before he came up with this idea. Roland opened the linen, and a rattan basket appeared in front of the two people. The top of the basket was connected with a lot of hemp ropes, and the other end of the hemp ropes was a huge canvas. What is this? Anna walked forward and circled around it, curiously asking. A hot air balloon, he replied with a smile. It can take you up to the sky, like a bird looking down at the earth. Fly to the sky. She turned her head, her eyes flashing with excitement. Is it really possible? Soaring in the sky was the dream of mankind since ancient times. From the glider to the hot air balloon, from the airship to the airplane, people had paid huge sacrifices in the exploration and challenge, and had never given up the pursuit of this aspect. Although witches existed in this world, flying was still the right of a few people. The scenery seen from a high altitude was bound to leave a deep impression. Of course, as long as the hot air fills this air bag, it's fine. Chapter 175. The principle of the hot air balloon was very simple, and there were only two difficulties in making it. One was the combustion device, and the other was the airbag. The first point was that without a pressure vessel to provide gas fuel, relying only on firewood or charcoal to heat the air was not only inefficient, but also limited by fuel. It could not fly very far. This was also the reason why the principle of the hot air balloon was discovered very early in history, but the first to be put into use in actual combat was the hydrogen balloon. So Roland simply gave up on the combustion device, and let Anna ignite the fire to heat it. The difficulty of the airbag was its airtightness, but for Roland, who had learned from the experience of his predecessors, this problem was very easy to solve, and he just needed to use a sandwich cloth. The outer layer of the airbag was a wear-resistant canvas, the middle was lined with cow intestinal epithelium, and the inner layer was a light gauze, so that when stitched it could prevent air leakage, and at the same time, it was not afraid of the pecking of birds. Roland opened the bottom of the airbag, and let Anna spit out a black flame with a temperature close to that of an ordinary flame. The airbag slowly swelled up, looking like a wrinkled winter melon. Considering that the hot air balloon needed to carry two people, the widest part of the airbag had a diameter of 5 meters, using the intestinal epithelium of 12 cows, and the stitching process took nearly a week. If he was not the lord of a territory, he might not have been able to make such a big toy. Does it use the buoyancy provided by the hot air to fly? Anna asked. I remember it mentioned in the book that hot air always rises. That's right, hot air rises, and cold air sinks. This is a common natural phenomenon. Using particle theory to explain it, the hot air ball's movement will intensify, and the ability to spread around will be stronger, and after the volume expands, the density will decrease. For the surrounding air that does not change, it is equivalent to it becoming lighter, so it will rise. After Roland finished explaining the principle, he found that except for Anna, who showed an expression of understanding, the other three were at a loss, and he could not help but secretly sigh at the importance of talent. When the airbag completely inflated and floated up, the traction rope was slowly straightened, and Roland was the first to flip into the basket, and then he took over the climbing Anna. I am still a little worried, Nightingale said uneasily. Why don't you let me go up and try it first? Believe me, nothing will happen, Roland said with a relaxed smile, and even if there is an accident, there is still lightning. I will catch them, don't worry. Lightning patted her chest. And me. Maggie imitated lightning and patted her chest. With a shake, the hot air balloon pulled the basket off the ground, and gradually climbed. Not long after, the two of them crossed the top of the castle, and the whole town appeared in front of them. To Roland, such a scene was not unfamiliar to him. After all, he was also someone who had seen skyscrapers. However, in Anna's eyes, it was a brand new experience that was completely different from her previous perspective. She leaned against the side of the basket and looked out. She grabbed Roland's arm tightly with one hand, looking excited and nervous at the same time. This was the first time that Roland had seen such an expression on her face. Perhaps people whose feet had never left the ground would have a slight fear of heights when they first flew into the sky. This was the first time that Roland had seen her show such an expression. She was probably a person whose feet had never left the ground. The rope was about 50 meters long, which was the height of a 15-story building in the future. Roland told Anna to reduce the firepower, and the hot air balloon finally hovered in the air. At the beginning, Lightning stayed close to the basket, but when she saw that the basket was stable, she felt relieved and began to play a game of tag with Maggie around the hot air balloon. Looking down from here, they could clearly see the roof of the castle, the town under construction, the Redwater River flowing from west to east, and the green farmlands along the river. How do you feel? Until Anna retracted her head, Roland asked with a smile. Thank you for your gift, she said excitedly. I didn't know that I could fly so high. You can go even higher. Roland sat down against the side wall of the rattan basket. If the rope was longer, it would be no problem to fly 10 times the distance. But the higher you go, the more complex the airflow will be, and it will be difficult to guarantee your safety. Moreover, this is only a primary aircraft. Later, when the piston machine is built, ordinary people will be able to fly faster and higher than birds, and then. He looked up at the blue sky. People will even be able to fly out of this world and go to the boundless space. Anna held her breath. Her eyes shone brightly as if something was about to come out of her mouth. I can't guarantee that we will be able to fly out of this world. Roland was amused by her appearance. But if we can build a piston machine, so that ordinary people can fly like birds, it should be possible in my lifetime. In fact, with Anna, there was no bottleneck in the processing ability. The current shortcoming was the performance of the materials. Inferior pig iron could be used to make a steam engine, wrought iron could be used to make cannons, and steel smelted from the black fire could also be used to make a revolving gun. But if it was an internal combustion engine, it would probably need high-quality cast iron, cast steel, or aluminum. The reason why Border Town can have its current appearance is all thanks to you, Miss Anna. After hearing this sentence, Anna was stunned. After a while, she sat down and softly said, My mother died in a fire, but I not only didn't die in the smoke and fire, but also became a witch. For a long time, I thought that my awakening had caused the fire, and I was extremely disgusted with myself as a witch. When I was locked in prison, I thought that I might be able to usher in freedom, but you rescued me from the prison and taught me how to use my ability. I didn't expect that in addition to burning and pain, flames could also have so many uses. Anna paused. Being able to meet you, I should feel extremely satisfied, but now I find that my thinking has changed. Sometimes I feel suffocated and uncomfortable, and I hope to get more. She climbed onto Roland's shoulder. Even so, do you still want to hire me? Her lake blue eyes sparkled, and her breath blew on his face, making him feel a little ticklish. Separated by thin clothes, he could feel her soft body and her thumping heartbeat. Even so, she didn't avoid his eyes. When there was no Nightingale, she was always full of enthusiasm and initiative. Before Roland could finish his words, Anna had already sealed his lips. After separating, he gently gasped, I want to hire you, always. Miss Anna. Yes. This time, he took the initiative to lower his head, and pressed his body against hers. Hey, wait, Maggie chased after Lightning for a while, suddenly stopped in the air, and looked at the empty basket. They're gone, coo. Ah. Lightning tilted her head and glanced at them. They just sat down. Won't you not be able to see the scenery outside? The scenery can be seen at any time, but there are not many opportunities like this. Opportunities? Maggie shook her wings, and landed on Lightning's shoulder. I don't quite understand, coo. Do you want to go see them, coo? No way, Lightning hugged the pigeon. This is a sacred ceremony, it can't be interrupted. Coo. Chapter 176. After staying in the air for half an hour, the hot air balloon slowly landed in the castle courtyard. As soon as the basket landed, the witches who were attracted by the hot air balloon began to gather around. Compared to the beginning when only Nightingale was present, now the members of the Witch Union were basically all present. Scroll, who had just returned from the city hall, had even trotted all the way here. After asking about the situation, she had been anxiously looking at the sky, fearing that this huge ball would fall. As soon as His Royal Highness climbed out of the basket, Scroll and Vendi immediately went up to preach to him, advising him not to put himself in danger. After the prince defended himself with a few words, he wisely used this novelty to change the topic. Nightingale thought it was a bit funny, but when she was about to greet him, her heart suddenly froze and she stopped in place. She saw His Royal Highness Roland carry Anna out of the basket, her eyes overflowing with a smile, her cheeks tinged with a touch of red. Her flaxen bangs were neatly parted to one side, and her hair was hung with a small clip, shining with a silver light. Nightingale remembered a few days ago when he was instructing the blacksmiths how to operate the large machines in the factory, he had casually ground a piece of silver ingot. Was that a hair clip personally made by His Royal Highness? The other witches also clamored to ride the hot air balloon, and soon, the air balloon inflated again. This time Anna and Nana were the ones who took off. Nightingale stood outside the crowd, watching the hot air balloon getting smaller and smaller. Her mind was filled with Anna's tender smile. Anna, who usually had a very calm and indifferent face, rarely showed such an expression. Nightingale had seen many similar expressions on the streets and alleys of the big cities during her wandering journey with the Witch Cooperation Association, so she knew what it meant. Obviously, His Royal Highness and Anna were not simply watching the scenery from above. Although Lightning and Maggie were there, it was impossible for them to do that, but once this idea emerged, it was difficult to suppress. She suddenly felt as if her heart was empty. Although she had already made a decision, when faced with this moment, Nightingale found that she was far less indifferent than she had imagined. She walked to a corner and sat down against the wall. Her mind went blank as she watched everyone making a ruckus. The hot air balloon descended again, and after Nana climbed out of the basket, Leaf, who had seized the opportunity, immediately sat inside. When Nightingale came back to her senses, Roland was no longer in the courtyard. After being lectured by Scroll, he returned to the castle to busy himself with his work. She was supposed to follow him to his office and stay by his side, just as she had done in the past. However, when Nightingale stood up, she found that she could not take a step forward. She really did not know what kind of expression she should use to face Roland. Even if he could not see her after entering the mist, Nightingale still knew that his happy expression would make her feel even worse. Just like that, the hot air balloon went up and down. After everyone had sat on it once, Vendi walked over. "Why are you still here? Don't you want to try it?" The feeling of looking down at the town from the sky is amazing. If there was anyone who was more difficult to face than His Royal Highness Roland, it would be Anna. Nightingale stood up in a panic. "No, I have to go back to my office." After saying that, she entered the mist. After walking 2 steps, she realized why she had to use her ability in the courtyard. She looked back at Vendi, who was looking around with a puzzled expression. Gritting her teeth, she quickly left. After dinner, she went back to the bedroom and threw herself on the bed. Today, until the end, she had not shown herself in the office. When His Royal Highness tentatively called out her name, she only used her hand to point at his back twice, indicating that she was here. Even when the other side took out the salt-baked dried fish from the mahogany table, which usually made her salivate, she did not compromise. "What's wrong? Did something happen today?" Vendi walked into the bedroom and closed the door. "I saw that while everyone was riding the hot air balloon, you were sitting alone on the side." "It's nothing." Nightingale turned over. Obviously there is something. Vendi sat on the edge of the bed, turned her body, and stared at her for a while. "I thought you were willing to tell me everything." The latter closed her eyes, and after a long time, she murmured, "It's because of Anna." "Anna?" Nightingale didn't want to say these annoying things, because it would only make her feel narrow-minded. After all, the first witch that His Royal Highness knew was Anna, not her. But if she didn't say it, her heart would feel like it was blocked by something, making her even more uncomfortable. In the Witch Cooperation Association, Vendi had helped her a lot. Whenever she was confused, the first person she thought of was always Vendi, and the other had never disappointed her. Thinking of this, she gently held Vendi's hand and roughly explained the matter. After listening to her, Vendi sighed. "Anna doesn't understand the importance of this matter. Do you also not understand? Last time I reminded you, it is impossible for him to be together with a witch. Roland Wimbledon is the king, he needs an heir to inherit the kingdom. From this point, he will never choose a witch as his wife. He will." "What?" Vendi was startled. "His Royal Highness Roland will marry a witch." Nightingale suddenly opened her eyes and said word by word, "He said it himself." She wanted to hide this information in the bottom of her heart, but now she couldn't bear the feeling of not being understood. Vendi seemed to be scared. After a long time she frowned and asked, "Are you sure?" "It's true." Nightingale repeated Scroll's question from the other day. When he was asked if it was possible for you to marry a witch, his answer was, "Why not? You know my ability, I can tell whether a person is lying or not." When he said this, he was serious. Vendi suddenly grabbed Nightingale's arm. "You remember, don't tell this to anyone, not even the Sisters of the Witch Union." "Why?" "Because he is destined to become the king of Greycastle. What does it mean to be a king without descendants? Even if there is no church, it will be difficult for the local nobles to support such a person to become their king. So this matter must be kept a secret, absolutely can't be told. What you need to do now is to protect his safety. Don't forget, whether he can become the ruler of Greycastle or not, is related to the fate of all sisters." Nightingale nodded. "As for the matter that is bothering you," Vendi thought for a moment, "do you want to ascend the Queen's throne, or do you just want to stay by His Royal Highness' side?" "Of course I want to stay by his side," Nightingale said without hesitation. "Then aren't you by his side now?" Vendi smiled. "There is indeed only one queen, but even if he ascends the throne, he will still need your protection. Do you understand what I mean?" Nightingale blinked her eyes and didn't answer. "So it's not difficult to be together, the difficult part is to accept the choice you have made." Vendi spread out her hands. "If you can't do it, you can only retreat, or go further. As for this question, only you know the answer." Chapter 177. Hermes Cathedral Chamber. The position of pope was still vacant. The three bishops sat side by side, and it was still Maine who spoke first. I heard that there was some unrest in the kingdom of Everwinter. The Judgment Army stationed there is already dealing with this matter. The one leading them is High Priest Cabourn, Tayfun replied. What's the reason? Isn't it because of those dregs who were drawn into the church? Heather whistled. After the queen was beheaded, those nobles joined the church one after another, and became the church's upper echelons. It was all because of your compromise plan, Sir Maine. Under the guise of arresting witches, they wantonly plundered the city, and the city guards also turned a blind eye to it. The people couldn't accept it, so it naturally caused a backlash. This is not my plan, Madam Heather, Maine said in a displeased tone, this is the will of His Holiness the Pope. This way, we can use the shortest amount of time to obtain everything in the kingdom, and not continue to compete with the nobles. There is no lack of outstanding talents among them, and if we can rope them in, it will be of great help to us. As for those parasites, they don't have the privilege of being inherited by the bloodline and will be eliminated in just one generation. Well, since you've even mentioned His Holiness the Pope, I won't say anything more. Heather shrugged her shoulders, but those who have ruined the church's reputation must be handed over to me. Maine looked at Bishop Tayfun, who pondered and said, I suggest not dealing with them for the time being. After suppressing the unrest, we can put the nobles under house arrest. After all, they've just joined the church. If we attack them now, it might cause general unrest among the nobles. No. Heather pounded the table and said, the rules of the church must not be violated. Any robbery carried out in the name of the church is a felony, and I am the one in charge of the law and arbitration. At times like this, we have to look at the bigger picture. I'm talking about the big picture. Heather directly interrupted Tayfun's words, don't forget what we relied on to establish an image of justice and fairness throughout the kingdom of Endless Winter. If we don't strike a severe blow at this time, the people of the kingdom of Endless Winter will lose confidence in us. This was the foundation of the church, not those damned nobles. If you don't agree, I will ask His Holiness the Pope directly. The Pope did not have time to worry about such things. The foundation of the church was not in the people, but in how powerful they were. Maine sighed and gestured for Tayfun to calm down. Then let High Priest Cabourn escort them back to the new holy city for trial. No, I'll go there myself, Heather said, I've been busy recently, and I expect to be back in about 2 or 3 months. For a trial, the more people who see it, the better. The Eternal Winter Royal Capital's ice platform seems to be a good place. Are you sure? Maine frowned. There aren't any extra commanders to protect you in the kingdom of Everwinter. You'll be in danger if you encounter an extraordinary. How could there be so many extraordinary witches? Heather said disapprovingly, just give me a team of judges, that's enough. If you insist. Maine didn't want to dwell on this topic anymore. I have bad news here. When the church's army attacked the Broken Tooth Castle in the kingdom of Wolfshart, they encountered an accident and lost more than 20 God's Punishment Army soldiers and more than 100 Judgment Army soldiers. Until now, the Broken Tooth Castle still hasn't been captured. More than 20 God's Punishment Army soldiers. Tayfun stared, who's the commander? Belle, she's already dead. The commander died in battle. It seems that they really encountered a terrible challenge. Heather said with great interest. Losing so many God's Punishment Army soldiers, it seems that Lord Wren will have a headache. You can't blame him, the terrain of the Broken Tooth Castle is special. The city gate was opened in the middle of the mountain, and it was about 3 feet, about 10 meters, high. They also destroyed the wooden bridge to enter the gate, and even used some of the alchemist's gadgets. Maine explained, according to the report, after they set up the wooden ladder, the God's Punishment Army soldiers had just climbed up when they were attacked by a strange flame. First, a large pile of white solid was ejected from the pipe above the city gate, and then it started to smoke and catch fire. The flame stuck to their bodies, and they couldn't get rid of it until it burned them. Now they are contacting the church's believers in the city to see if they can attack from both inside and outside. I dare say that the church in the city has certainly been bathed in blood. Heather curled her lips. If they want to attack, they should send more people to fill it up. The alchemist's gadgets have never been able to be produced in large quantities, they will be used up after filling it up. That's the god's punishment army. Taifun was so angry that his beard trembled. Do you know how difficult it is to transform a god's punishment army? Now there are less than 1,000 people. If we lose more than half of the god's punishment army in order to unify the continent, how will we resist the months of the demons? Not to mention the devils afterwards. Don't argue, Maine said aloud. I told you this news, not to let you argue about the means of attack. The church currently needs more God's punishment army, and now that the kingdom of eternal winter is under the control of the church, some things can be done more justifiably. In the past, the seeds were sent twice a year, but now, I want to add one more time. Spring has been affected by the months of demons, so the length of the season is not consistent, so from summer onwards, a batch of seeds must be sent to the holy city every quarter, and the transformation ceremony will be held accordingly. This matter will be handed over to you, Lord Taifun. But, there aren't that many orphans and babies that can be taken in. The old bishop stroked his beard. Not everyone will send their abandoned children to the church. So you want to find a way to fight for it. The kingdom of eternal winter is already the church's longest established kingdom, and it has the most believers. If even this land can't provide enough manpower, the other 3 kingdoms will only be slower to digest. Don't forget, in the process of unifying the continent, the turmoil will have to be quelled by the army of judges and the God's punishment army. It's not that there aren't any people. Heather curled up the corner of her mouth. There are as many stray children on the street as there are stray cats and dogs. I heard that there are also black street rats who specially recruit these children to join them, training them to become pickpockets, informants, smugglers, or scapegoats. Before the nobility was eliminated, they could still carry the rats to shelter them from the wind and rain, but now, thanks to Lord Maine, they have all become part of the church. If the sewers have no cover, where can the rats hide? If you send out the army of judges to catch all the underground forces in one fell swoop, I think you can harvest a lot of children, while at the same time cleaning up the dregs will leave a good impression on the people, and will also deter those nobles who are ready to make trouble. It's like killing 3 birds with 1 stone, isn't it? It's indeed a good method, Maine thought. No matter how extreme her temperament is, when faced with a problem, she can always come up with a solution quickly, except for some words that must be deliberately ignored. Let's implement this method. In short, before the fall, we must occupy the entire territory of the Wolfshart Kingdom, except for the army of judges who are stationed to maintain order. All the other troops must be transferred back to Hermes to defend against this year's months of demons. This time, the enemy will only be stronger. Although Taifun was reluctant, he finally nodded. When the time comes, the nobles whose interests have been damaged will jump out to protest. Don't blame me for not reminding you. In addition, the Rose Kingdom has already noticed the movements of the neighboring countries. Many of the nobles in the cities are targeting the church, and in some places there have been incidents of looting and burning of churches. I suggest that we organize a temporary evacuation of the believers. There is no need to waste them in this kind of conflict. No, they must resist to the end, Maine rejected. The more the believers are sacrificed, the more reason we will have to retaliate. This is not a waste, but a spark to ignite the fire. For the church, there are not many believers, and the foundation of the kingdom is not deep, so retreating will only make the church weaker. Well, I was just mentioning it, that's all. Taifun spread out his hands. Finally, there's the kingdom of Greycastle. Well, you see for yourselves. He took out a roll of paper from his sleeve and threw it in front of Maine. Maine opened it and glanced at it. This letter was actually written by the Queen of Clearwater, Garcia Wimbledon. Soon, his eyebrows wrinkled. She actually hanged Priest Decca. She also fed all the believers to the fish, Taifun added. The church was also demolished to the ground. She should have discovered the side effects of the pill. Heather smacked her lips. I already told you, even if you continue to replenish that thing, the effect will become weaker and weaker, until finally it will die. Using this kind of thing to destroy the enemy's army is a good thing, but once the effect appears, the other side will also know what the church is planning. But the troublesome thing is, I remember that the previous intelligence report mentioned that not many of her subordinates took the pill, right? Instead, a lot of them were eaten by the southern barbarians. No more than 1,000, she said that this account is on our heads. Maine put down the letter. It's simply ridiculous. Without the support of the church, how could she become the Queen of Clearwater? Where is Timothy Wimbledon? After receiving our pills, why hasn't he attacked the Southern Territory yet? Chapter 178. Genius 1 second. Remember Love Yogo. TalkNet, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Ha ha ha. Heather laughed out loud. It's impossible to expect a chess piece to completely obey orders, as long as it maintains the same goal as us. Love Go Little Talk Netka. No matter where he attacks, as long as he continues to consume the soldiers. In any case, Greycastle is the last kingdom to be attacked, so there is still time for them to fight. Didn't Roland Wimbledon refuse our pills last time? We can let Timothy put more pressure on the Western Territory, maybe he will accept it. That being said, the Queen of Clearwater's open hostility still made Maine somewhat unhappy. After all, this chess piece was personally chosen by him. If Timothy occupied the other territories of Greycastle and still didn't fight with Garcia, but instead stationed his troops to maintain a stalemate, the fight for the throne would not be able to achieve the desired effect. It seems that some other means will have to be taken. Regarding the Western Territory, let's wait for the news from the diplomatic mission before making a decision, he said. That's all for today. Please act according to the plan. I still have to go to Hermes. Ah, that's right, Heather suddenly realized. Today is the transformation day, right? How many people have applied to participate in the transformation ceremony? This is the secret of the mechanism. Maine stood up, and without looking back, walked out of the secret room. After going down the long suspended stairs to the bottom of the cave, the archbishop stepped over the mirror-like smooth white grinding stone, and walked towards the depths of the mechanism. Different from the usual quiet, today the mechanism was quite lively. A group of approved judges were standing outside waiting, most of them entering this place for the first time, so they were curiously looking around. Seeing Maine, all of them straightened their chests, clenched their fists and saluted, "Your Excellency." He smiled and nodded in return. These judges were the church's elite warriors, pious to God and willing to sacrifice themselves. The God's Punishment Army's transformation ceremony was not guaranteed to be successful. They had already understood this before submitting the application, but even so, they were still willing to sacrifice their lives for this great honor. Under the reverent eyes of the warriors, he passed through the third checkpoint and arrived in front of the pivotal secret area. The Pope's guards were already waiting here. They bowed and pushed open the metal door behind them. Maine followed the guard into the room. From here onwards, it was the heart of the Hermes mechanism. All of the church's research and inventions were carried out here. There were no torches in the pivotal secret area. His vision suddenly turned dark. After a while, a long and narrow passage appeared in front of him. The walls and ceiling of the passage were cast from iron, and both sides were inlaid with fluorescent stones. This strange stone was a kind of God's stone of retaliation. After being stained with demonic beast blood, it would emit a green fluorescent light. At the end of the passageway was a cage. Walking into the cage, the guard pulled the trigger, and the chain above his head creaked, sounding especially ear-piercing in the quiet passage. Accompanied by this sound, the cage slowly sank into the hole in the ground. Then, Maine's eyes suddenly opened up. An extremely spacious underground space appeared in front of him. Love Go Small Say Netka. Such a shocking scene, no matter how many times he saw it, would always give him a feeling of insignificance. According to common sense, the cave buried underground should be dark, so dark that he couldn't even see his fingers in front of him. But here, the whole cave was illuminated by the light of the God's Stone of Retaliation. The huge God's Stone of Retaliation looked like countless prisms rising from the ground, forming clusters of crystal flowers. The smallest prism was as thick as a person's body, and the biggest one was so big that it would take more than 10 people to encircle it. The height was uneven, and the tallest one almost reached the top of the cave, even higher than the Tower of Heaven of the Hermes Cathedral. Their colors were also different. The densest cluster of God's stone of retaliation was lavender, while the clusters on the side were from dark blue to light green, and the smaller ones were white. There were also some prisms that had just emerged from the ground, almost transparent. The luster of the purple God's stone of retaliation was the most conspicuous, especially the one that surpassed the Tower of Heaven. Its brightness was close to that of the full moon, so that the bottom of the cave could be faintly seen without the help of a torch. Under the influence of such a dense and huge number of God's stone of retaliation, the inside of the mountain was in an area where magic could not operate. Moreover, all the God's stone of retaliation sold by the church were mined from here. The space of the cave was enough to accommodate 5 or 6 Hermes Cathedral, and they had indeed built a building here that was exactly the same as the cathedral, and named it the Pivotal Secret Temple. However, compared to the cathedral on the top of the mountain, this one looked much older. From midair, Maine could see that there was a black iron gate on the mountain wall behind the temple, which was the entrance to the foot of the Hermes mountain, which was connected to the old holy city. Therefore, in a sense, this ancient building was the main body of the mechanism. It had existed here long before the establishment of the new holy city. It took no less than half a quarter of an hour for the cage to reach the ground. Maine walked out of the cage, tidied up his robe, and followed the messenger to the temple. The transformation ceremony was held in the hall on the first floor. After entering the hall, the bishop felt that the surroundings had been restored to the light. It was no longer the cold blue and purple light, but the orange light of thousands of burning candles. Above his head was a 3-tiered tower-style chandelier, and there were also many candlesticks placed around the hall. In the blink of an eye, it looked like countless stars were swaying. Thanks to the open flame, the chill in the cave had been dispelled a lot. The man standing in the middle of the 2 transformation tables was the highest leader of the church, Pope O'Brien. He wore a striking red robe with gold trimmings, and a glittering jewel crown on his head. He was carefully inspecting the transformation equipment, making the final preparations for the ceremony. "Your Holiness." He went forward and knelt in front of O'Brien, kissing his fingers. "Rise, child." The Pope's voice was hoarse and slow. "There's no one here other than the guards, so there's no need to pay attention to the complicated etiquette." "Yes." Maine stood up, and could not help but be startled. His Holiness looked much older than the last time he saw him. His face was covered with deep wrinkles, and his skin was an unhealthy white, loose and dull. The densely packed brown spots were extremely eye-catching. The bishop's eyes became hot. "You have worked hard. This is the trace of time," O'Brien said calmly. "No one can fight against time. I don't have much life left, and I'm afraid I won't see the day when humans defeat the demons, so I don't have to bear the unknown pain. But you still have to continue fighting until you finally defeat the enemy, or be defeated by them. And if we fail again, we will be completely destroyed." Maine nodded. "I will do my duty until the last moment." "Very good." The old man smiled. "You've done very well recently. You've increased the number of Judgment Army soldiers for the church by more than 1,000. This time, there are also 62 applications for transformation, which is already the highest number in years. Your Holiness, can you tell me how many God's Punishment Army soldiers we need to defeat the demons?" Maine hesitated for a moment before asking. "All the information I know about the demons comes from the Holy Book. But the records in the Holy Book are not complete. There's no record of their origin, number, or fighting methods. I know that I'll only be qualified to know these secrets after I become the Pope, but..." O'Brien reached out his hand to stop him. "You're too anxious, child. You have to be patient. It won't be long before you take over this crown and become the next Pope. At that time, all your questions will be answered in the library at the top of the Pivotal Secret Temple. Now, I can only tell you that the more, the better. He took a breath. In addition, although I didn't ask you to come for the transformation ceremony, since we've met, you'll try to preside over this year's transformation. With me watching, it can also be considered as accumulating some, experience in the future. Maine quickly patted the Pope's back. When the Pope's breathing became a little smoother, he bowed his head and said, "Yes, Your Holiness. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote on it. Your support is my greatest motivation." For mobile users, please read it here. Chapter 179. The God's Punishment Army's transformation ceremony was something that the Pope had to master. A year ago, when Maine received the God's Punishment Army's ancient book from His Majesty O'Brien, it was equivalent to obtaining the right to inherit the position of the next Pope. Maine had already memorized the contents of the book by heart. A God's Punishment Army needed to sacrifice a witch's life, fusing her blood with the God's Stone of Retaliation, and then injecting it into the body of a judge. This ceremony had been improved several times over the past hundreds of years, but the essence remained the same. The witches determined the upper limit of the number of God's Punishment Army, and the will of the judges was the key to the success rate of the transformation. After reading this ancient book, he finally understood why the church took in so many underage women every year. The witches appeared without any warning, and before the magic gathered, they were no different from ordinary people. But once the magic began to gather, their bodies, organs, and blood would all be changed. Therefore, in addition to expanding the scale of breeding, there was no other way. This was also the reason why he agreed with Heather's statement. Everything they had done could already be regarded as extremely evil. Every high-ranking member's hands were stained with blood, and they had slaughtered more witches than any executioner. But in order to defeat the devil, in order to avoid the destruction of mankind, they had to do this. Only the winner was qualified to receive God's favor. Two judges were lying on the transformation table. Maine recognized them. They were Darian from the advance camp and Tucker Thor from the Holy City Guard. The latter was also a presiding judge. Although both of them were smiling, the bishop could still see the tension in their muscles and clenched fists. He patted their shoulders. "Relax, I believe you can do it. My lord, when the time comes, we only need to endure the pain." Darian couldn't help but ask. "That's right, we just need to endure it," Maine said with a smile. "You're Darian, right? You still remember my name," he said excitedly. "Of course, you're a member of the advance camp, and participated in the defense of Hermes last year. The captain is Alicia, am I right?" Yes, Darian nodded repeatedly. "Our team suffered heavy casualties in a battle. Half of our team members died at the hands of demonic hybrids. At that time, I thought, if only I had the ability to kill all those deformed hybrids. So, Your Excellency, I want to join the God's Punishment Army. It's good to become stronger to protect your comrades," Maine encouraged. He then looked at the presiding judge. "What about you? Why did Tucker Thor decide to join the God's Punishment Army?" "In order to protect the new holy city, Your Excellency," he said firmly. "The priests said that every year from now on, the demonic beasts will become stronger and stronger. Last time, they had already touched the walls of the holy city. If it weren't for the God's Punishment Army, the cathedral might have been destroyed. I also want to be a strong shield against the demonic beasts and a spear that can pierce through the enemy." "Very good. Both of you are the pride of the church." Maine followed the instructions in the ancient book and used conversation to dispel their nervousness and fear. Seeing that the two of them were getting more and more excited, he waved his hand and signaled for the ceremony to continue. The guard came forward and blindfolded the two of them, then used bracelets and ankles to firmly fasten their limbs to the conversion platform. Then the witch was carried in and placed between the two of them. As a witch raised by the church, she had spent most of her life in the monastery of the old holy city. After her awakening, she would be sent to the pivotal secret area to wait for the conversion. The day before the sacrifice, she had been given a large amount of dreamland water, an herb made from sleeping fern and winter flowers, to ensure that any noise during the ceremony would not wake her up. Age? Number 1, 18 years old, the guard replied. This was a routine inquiry. Only the blood of an adult witch was enough to meet the requirements for the conversion of 2 God's Punishment Army members at the same time. Maine checked the list of witches again and announced the start of the ceremony. A delicate silver needle was inserted into the witch's arm. Red-brown blood flowed down the tube wrapped around the needle and gathered in the crystal basin under her body. The bottom of the basin was covered with a layer of light blue God's Stone of Retaliation. The blood gradually soaked the stone and finally filled the whole basin. Soon, the God's Stone of Retaliation changed. Through the side of the basin, it could be seen that the blue stone was absorbing the blood. After about a quarter of an hour, the stone gradually melted and disappeared. The turbid blood became clear and the color changed from reddish-brown to sky blue. These operations seemed simple, but after tens of thousands of experiments, a complete and reliable set of steps was obtained. For example, the estimation of the witch's blood according to her age and body shape, the production of the silver needle and the tube, which part of the body to insert the silver needle and which part to insert the blood, as well as the quality and quantity of the God's Stone of Retaliation used and so on. The ancient book recorded in detail the previous failed experiments and improvements, and also explained the general principle of the conversion. After the witch's body was transformed by magic, her blood had the ability to strengthen the organs and tendons. If it was used directly, it would only kill the recipient in an instant. It was necessary to soak the God's Stone of Retaliation in the witch's blood and dissolve the unknown power within it. Only then could it be injected into the body of the transformed person. Even so, this kind of blood would damage the person's mind, causing them to gradually lose emotion and intelligence, and eventually leaving only instincts and a strong will. The strength of the surviving God's Punishment Army was equivalent to that of an extraordinary. Moreover, even if they didn't wear the God's Stone of Retaliation, they would still have the anti-magic effect. It had to be said that this was a wonderful combination. The witch's blood could kill humans, and swallowing the God's Stone of Retaliation could also put people to death. But when the two were combined, they could instead minimize the adverse effects. When the blue liquid slowly flowed along the tube into the bodies of the 2 judges, the blue veins on their arms and necks suddenly bulged. Their expressions became grim, as if they were enduring great pain. Darian was the first to shout. He struggled on the stage, his 5 fingers clenched and then opened, but his hands and feet were unable to move. Soon, his whole body was covered with a layer of sweat. Tucker wasn't any better. He issued a series of low growls, a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his whole body twitched. The level of the liquid in the crystal basin slowly decreased, and when it was about to reach the bottom, Darian's voice turned into a sobbing voice. He randomly shouted some unclear words, his skin burst open and dissolved, and his whole body emitted white smoke. According to the description in the ancient book, his transformation was basically on the verge of failure. When Maine was hesitating whether he should continue to observe, the Pope pressed his shoulder from behind. Enough, let him be free. A guard came forward, pulled out a dagger, and neatly pierced Darian's neck. Then he suddenly twisted the hilt, ending his pain. After an unbearable wait, Tucker Thor's twitching subsided, his breathing gradually stabilized, and his skin changed from red to light blue. Maine knew that he had survived the transformation ceremony. One person succeeded, one person failed. Such a result made the Lord sigh. In a short period of half an hour, the church had lost a devout judge, and at the same time wasted half of the witch's blood. However, there were still 60 judges waiting to be transformed, so he must let the ceremony continue. When the ceremony was completed, Maine could hardly stand. He staggered down the stage, and almost lost his manners. He sat against the wall of the hall. The Pope slowly walked over and stood in front of him. To tell you the truth, your performance surprised me, child. The first time I presided over the ceremony, it was much worse than you. That year, I was 45 years old, and the strong smell of blood made me vomit directly on the ceremony stage. I almost wasted a whole basin of blood. The former pope even severely beat me, but after the beating, he ordered me to return to the stage and continue to preside over the ceremony. Maine opened his mouth, but did not know what to say. So, don't think about anything, go back and rest for a day. Yes, Your Holiness. The bishop took a deep breath, and when he was ready to leave, he suddenly remembered the purpose of his visit. By the way, you asked me to come to the pivotal secret area for, oh, look at my memory. Oh, Brian shook his head, I asked you to come to give you a new poison developed by the agency. Poison? In the pivotal secret area, there was an institution that specialized in the research of God's stone of retaliation, such as cold-expelling pills, fluorescent stones, berserker drugs, and so on. Once there were results, they would be distributed to the bishop. But he had never heard that they were also involved in poisons. In Maine's impression, this should be the expertise of the alchemists. According to them, this result was completely accidental. The Pope slowly said, as long as it is sprinkled on a rotten corpse, it will have a long-term effect on the surrounding people, unlike ordinary poisons that must be poured into the mouth. Without a special antidote, there is basically no cure. You can ask Master Crow's Eye about the specific situation. I think it may come in handy in the battle against the Four Kingdoms. Chapter 180. Recently, Roland was immersed in a happy mood. Even when sitting alone in the office, he would occasionally hum one or two songs, while recalling the good times in the hot air balloon basket. The appearance of Anna closing her eyes and asking for a kiss was too cute, just thinking about it made him unable to help but raise the corner of his mouth. And the most important thing was the meaning of her words, which had undoubtedly revealed her fiery feelings. The only thing he could do at that time was to respond to her more enthusiastically. So much so that when he landed, Roland felt a faint pain in his lips. Maybe it was because the kiss was too long that she couldn't breathe properly, and when she panicked, she used her teeth. In any case, he hadn't experienced this feeling for a long time. When he was close to a quarter of his life, the skills he had learned from TV, movies, novels, and comics could finally be put to use. Moreover, the target was such a beautiful and moving Miss Anna. Roland felt that he had finally taken the first step towards becoming a winner in life. Satisfied, he took a deep breath and put his hand into the drawer, wanting to choose some snacks to calm his joy, but the result was that he felt empty air. The beef jerky was obviously put in yesterday. Roland looked back at Nightingale, who was lying by the window. The latter whistled and pretended to casually look at the scenery. He had deliberately replaced the fish jerky with beef jerky in order to prevent Nightingale from stealing it, but he didn't expect that she would also accept the beef jerky. At this moment, footsteps came from outside the door. Your Royal Highness, Sir Berev is asking for an audience. Let him in. Nightingale didn't hide her figure like before, but pulled down her hood, returned to the recliner by the wall and sat down. The assistant minister pushed the door and saw that there were other people in the office. He was a little surprised, but soon returned to normal. Your Royal Highness, this month's population statistics have been done. He handed over a roll of parchment. So fast. With the registration file, it is now much more convenient to count, the assistant minister said with a smile. Your previous decision was really a wise move. Well, now they're starting to flatter me. Roland unrolled the paper roll and saw that according to the different occupations of the people in Border Town, the number of tools was arranged according to their categories. It was clear at a glance. Compared to the reports that didn't even have paragraphs when he first transmigrated, Berev's ability had indeed improved significantly. The first row was also the largest group, the serfs, currently totaling 3,628 people, including their families. There was also a note at the bottom, 1,500 serfs engaged in farming. Your Highness, aren't there too few farmers? Barav pointed to the first line and said, according to Sirius Eli's estimate from the Ministry of Agriculture, if we want Border Town to stop importing food, I'm afraid we'll have to double the amount of farmland and manpower in order to meet Border Town's food needs. Roland had some impression of the name Sirius. He should be a knight of the Charging Wolf family. The 1,500 people engaged in farming were the first batch of serfs, and the subsequent batches were all transferred by Roland to the mines or cars construction team. They had also received the same guarantee: as long as they worked for a long time, they would be promoted to free people. I don't intend to be self-sufficient in food this year. There is still a lot of wheat stored in the castle warehouse, enough for 2 or 3 months of consumption. Moreover, the newly planted wheat this year is also different. Different? Barav was startled. Well, you'll know when the time comes, Roland smiled. That was Leaf's improved golden ones. The yield per plant was at least 3 times higher than ordinary wheat, and when the harvest came, it would definitely surprise everyone. This was also the reason why he didn't want to invest too much of the population in agriculture. With Leaf's magical crops, in the future, only a small number of farmers would be needed to feed the majority of the people, thus saving precious human resources and investing them in industrial development and urban construction. He continued to look down. The second line of the parchment was the construction personnel. The following remarks were very complicated. There were stonemasons, bricklayers, clay craftsmen, carpenters, handymen, and so on. The total number was more than 1,100 people, most of which were serfs working as handymen. It was precisely because of this new force that Border Town was able to quickly build a batch of residential areas and factories. Building templates, batches, and procedures were an important means of speeding up the construction progress. Although in Roland's eyes, this speed was still not enough, for the locals, it was already considered shocking. The third line was the mining personnel. Very similar to the construction industry above, the number of local residents in Border Town had dropped to 25, mainly responsible for steam engine operation, mine registration, and management work. The remaining 1,600 people were outsiders, including the captured mercenaries in the Battle of Longsong Stronghold and the serfs who were sent later. Recently there have been several fights in the mining area, Barav said, mainly between the mercenaries and the serfs. This is a hidden danger, Your Highness. They are too many. Once a fight breaks out, it will be impossible to rely on the 25 managers to control it. I suggest that the First Army be responsible for helping guard. Well. Roland thought for a moment. Let's do it this way. Now there is a lack of manpower. There is no way to form a police force. I will talk to Iron Axe. A team of about 50 people should be enough. Police, what is that? You can think of it as a patrol team, but the scope of jurisdiction is much larger. Basically the internal security is completed by them. In this era there was no distinction between internal violence and external violence, so letting the army take care of public security would not become a dark history. Before dealing with the huge enemy of the church, he did not intend to disperse manpower to form a second set of violent machines. Ranked fourth was the First Army of Border Town. After the end of the Battle of Longsong Stronghold, the First Army's prestige resounded throughout the western region. 300 people defeated the Duke's coalition army of 1,500 people at a very small cost, making the nobles of Longsong Stronghold lose the courage to resist. After the reward, Roland doubled the size of the First Army, increasing it to 600 people. And this time, when the recruitment list was released, the town's name filled the whole square. Roland still followed the idea that the People's Army was composed of the people, and selected 300 people with good qualities and no criminal records to join the First Army. The rest were all kinds of technical personnel. For example, in the smelting and firing industry, the number of people had increased significantly in the past month, from the original 20 people to about 400 people. Thanks to the furnace expert Lozia, the North Slope Furnace Group could not only produce red bricks, but also fire cement and glass. At the same time, 3 shaft furnaces were being set up, and soon, the ore placed in the yard could be first smelted in the shaft furnace, and then transported to the place where it was needed. As for education, chemistry, industry, and animal husbandry, these added up to less than 50 people, so from the point of view of population, Border Town still had a long way to go. However, the town, which was originally mainly composed of hunters and miners, could become like this in half a year. It could be said to be earth-shaking. Chapter 181. Genius 1 second. Remember, if you want to go. TalkNet, providing you with wonderful novels to read. After Berev left, Roland put the statistics table into the drawer and looked at Nightingale. He wanted to ask her what was going on, but after hesitating for a moment, he didn't ask. He had a vague answer in his heart, but this kind of thing was too embarrassing to say. If he guessed wrong, it would be even more embarrassing. Roland had to swallow these words into his stomach. Let's go to the North Slope mine. Want to see what kind of changes Soroya's new ability has brought? Although Nightingale's behavior had become a bit strange, her attitude was still the same as before. She took off her hood and said with a smile, "Let's go." Maybe I'm thinking too much, Roland thought as he looked at the witch who was walking quickly to his side. Riding the hot air balloon that day had affected far more than just 1 or 2 people. He had never thought that Soroya would actually become the second witch to have a qualitative change in her ability. In fact, even she herself hadn't been aware of this change. Roland also happened to discover this yesterday. Since he had given the hot air balloon as a gift to Anna, it had been placed in the castle courtyard. If anyone wanted to go up to the sky to see the scenery, they could just call Anna and Lightning. Until the day before, when it rained, Roland suddenly remembered that the rattan basket would become soft and peeling after being soaked in water. Even if it was dried, it would still reduce its toughness, so he thought of taking it back to the castle. He had intended to call the attendants to do this, but after thinking about it, the hot air balloon was a gift from him to Anna. Moreover, the rope and the air bag were easy to damage, so he simply decided to personally move it back to the castle. Love Go Small Say Netkuhi called Hummingbird to go to the vestibule, but the results surprised him. He saw that the basket was full of pictures. All of them were aerial views of the scenery of Border Town, but it was different from the previous pictures. This time it was as if her picture was standing up. Roland didn't care about the falling raindrops. He took a closer look and found that for the first time, her picture had a thickness. It was not strange for a painting to have a thickness. In theory, a real painting should have a thickness because the paint itself had a thickness. In oil paintings, this kind of thickness could even be used. Brushes, or scrapers could be used to create uneven textures. Through the changes in layers, the texture could be enhanced and the expressive power of the painting enhanced. However, Soroya was different. Her paintings were not drawn with pens and paint, but the manifestation of magic power. That was why the thickness created by the magic power was particularly strange. He still remembered that when he gently touched the protruding trees, it was as if he was really scraping the branches and green leaves. They were not hard and solid, but slightly soft and gelatinous. But when he touched the ground, it felt much harder, as if he was really touching a piece of stone. It was simply unbelievable. The rainwater flowed down the landscape painting, unable to soak into the vines at all. When he returned to the castle, he immediately called for Soroya, and Nightingale also confirmed this. Under the observation of the mist, the mana in Soroya's body was no longer in the form of a golden vortex like before. Instead, it had condensed into a constantly spinning ribbon. Walking into the courtyard of the Jean factory, Anna greeted him with a smile and gave Roland a big hug. Since they had made their relationship clear, she had obviously been more affectionate in front of him. Roland was in a good mood and rubbed her head. The silver hairpin on her hair shone in the sun. But he saw from the corner of his eyes that Soroya, who was also about to come over and bow, stood in place, not knowing what to do. Finally, she blushed and looked away, pretending not to see anything. Ahem, Nightingale pulled Soroya back to the table and deliberately asked loudly, "Did you paint all these?" Roland shook his head with a smile, let go of Anna, and walked over with her. He saw that the table was covered with Soroya's paintings, which were the scenery that could be seen in the courtyard. The only difference was the thickness of the painting. Some were only about a millimeter higher than the paper, while some were close to 3 centimeters. This was also the training content that Roland had arranged for her this morning, to test the maximum thickness of the magic-generated paint as much as possible. This is the thickest one. Roland touched the 3 centimeter thick painting with his finger. When he was enchanted with the blue sky, that part of the paint was so soft that it seemed to have no texture, but when he slid it down to the courtyard wall, he immediately felt a gritty friction. It seemed that it was really as he had guessed. After the evolution of the magic pen, the things drawn were not only consistent with the shape and color of the real thing, but even the touch was close to the real thing. It can be thicker, but after this thickness, the magic consumption will become very large. Soroya pointed to a brown protrusion on the table. I wanted to draw a tree outside the wall, but when I just drew a tree trunk, I used up half of my magic. So this is what you painted? Roland stretched out his hand and found that the paint was at least 10 centimeters thick. I thought it was really a standing piece of bark. Having said that, it was stuck to the table very firmly. The prince grabbed the bark with his hand and lifted it up until the 2 legs of the table were off the ground, but the bark was not separated from the table. Nightingale took out a dagger and cut it for a long time before she made a small cut at the bottom. This thing seems to be embedded in the table. In the end, it was Anna who cut it open. The black flame turned into a thread and swept across the table. The paint gave off a white smoke and fell to the ground. The cut was smooth but not smooth, and there were black burn marks. Roland picked up the fallen paint and held it in his hand, only to find that its weight was far lighter than he had imagined. Why did you suddenly think of changing the style of painting? No, I mean, how did you decide to fill the painting with thickness? He asked. I think it's probably because it's the first time I've seen such a landscape, Soraya said, recalling. When I looked down at the earth from the sky, I realized that the paintings I've made before, which you said were almost comparable to the photos of the real scene, were in fact not real. Especially after I painted the scenery in the basket, I felt that it was not real. She paused a little and slowed down her speech. The tops of the trees are pointed and will sway with the wind. The mountains are high and low, like the rising and falling chest. The rivers are embedded in the earth, and the ships go through them. This is the scenery I saw, not a thin flat surface. So I wanted to make the painting more real, I wanted it to stand up like these magnificent scenery. But I redrew it several times, but I didn't succeed. Just when I was feeling a little depressed, I suddenly remembered the little ball you mentioned. Little ball? Roland raised his eyebrows. Yes, she nodded with some embarrassment. It's the knowledge you taught us. I thought if everything is made of little balls, then is the painting the same? I tried a few more times, imagining the painting with the magic pen as a colorful ball, they stacked on top of each other, and finally formed a whole color. Then, the painting suddenly squirmed, the emerald green forest rose up, the dark green river sank, and finally became what you see. At that time, Anna and I were startled by this change. If you didn't mention it to me later, I would never have thought that it was the ability that evolved. I see. But compared to Anna's black fire, my evolved ability seems to have no other use other than to make the painting more vivid. Soroya stuck out her tongue. No. How could that be? Roland shook his head. In my eyes, it is not a simple painting. It would be too wasteful to only use this ability to paint. He remembered the scene of the rain sliding over the surface of the basket, but it could not soak into it. Rather than saying it was a paint, it was better to say it was a magic coating. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote on it. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please read it here. Chapter 182. As long as it could cover the surface of an object and form a solid continuous film, it could be called a coating. The coating itself could be gaseous, liquid, or solid, and its uses were also different. From the initial aesthetic decoration to the later protection of the object's durability, it could all be considered a kind of coating. Roland then carried out a series of tests. The results of the tests made him exceptionally happy. Probably because of the concept of, the longer the painting could be preserved, the better. It was already very difficult to completely remove her previous photo paintings without destroying the carrier, and after the evolution of her ability, this characteristic was raised to a new level. First of all, this kind of pigment with high adhesion and light weight showed two completely different physical properties. It could change the flexibility of its own material according to the painting object. For example, when painting the sky or clouds, it would be as soft as cotton candy, and it had a high resistance to stretching and shearing. When it was replaced with iron ingots or glass, it would become hard and brittle, and could be directly smashed with a hammer. In other words, due to the limited quality, its performance in the aspect of flexibility was far better than that of rigidity, which was also in line with Soroya's understanding of pigments. Secondly, no matter what kind of characteristics it showed, its chemical properties were very stable. Not only would it not react with dilute sulfuric acid or dilute nitric acid, but it also showed repulsion to water and oil. When he filled a cardboard box with paint with water, the thin bottom of the box did not show any signs of water seeping. After pouring out the water, the clear liquid beads rolled in the box, like dew on a lotus leaf. At this time, when he touched the bottom with his fingers, it still felt dry. In the high-temperature resistance test, after Anna dripped molten iron into the paper box, the paper as a carrier suddenly burst into flames, but the coating itself did not change much apart from being pushed open a little by the molten iron. It was not until Anna's black fire continued to heat up the coating that it began to melt and deform, at the same time emitting white smoke, and finally turned into a black gelatinous substance. What made Roland most excited was that this coating also had insulating properties. After covering the copper wire, it could be regarded as the enameled wire of the future. He used the simple direct current generator in the courtyard to prove this point. At this point, Roland had a complete understanding of Soroya's new ability. Unlike Anna's black fire, which surpassed green flame in every aspect, Anna's ability after her evolution was more like an expansion of her previous painting ability. Now, she could paint realistic oil paintings, as well as thin photographs like before. It all depended on the thoughts in her mind, and both abilities could be used simultaneously. In addition, when drawing a thick scroll, if the thickness was controlled to less than 1 centimeter, Soroya could draw for several hours without stopping. Once it was more than 3 centimeters, the consumption of magic power would increase rapidly. After 10 centimeters, it would reach a threshold. Almost all the magic power in one's body would only be enough to draw 1 or 2 strokes. Of course, from another perspective, this was also the fastest and most effective way to vent when facing the bite of mana. It was still a summoning ability. Within the effective range of the god's stone of retaliation, the magic pen would suddenly disappear, and Soroya would not be able to draw a new pattern. However, the already drawn coating would not be affected by the god's stone of retaliation. Under the observation of Nightingale, there was no trace of magic power left on it. In other words, the substance produced by the magic pen was real. As for the use of the coating, there were too many. Soroya herself would never have thought that her new ability would bring so many changes to the town. This meant that Roland could quickly obtain a batch of water pipes coated with anti-rust materials, as well as a large bundle of enameled wire, and even high-temperature resistant fireproof bricks. The originally unreachable 3 supplies project, water, electricity, and road, suddenly saw the light of dawn. At the same time, this also reminded him that personal experience was far more profound than the axioms in books. If the witches could see the microscopic world more intuitively, wouldn't it accelerate the process of their acceptance of the particle theory, thus triggering a new round of evolution? For example, a microscope that could observe the structure of cells and microorganisms. Roland felt that it was necessary to give it a try. North Slope Furnace Group. Blast! Let the fire burn brighter! Lozia shouted. Although he couldn't see what was inside the shaft furnace, with 3 carts of charcoal poured in, the iron and stones inside should have been heated red. When he was called to Border Town by a letter from Carl van Bate, he thought it was a desolate and barren place. If the letter didn't mention that the Mason Guild might be reborn here, he would not be willing to go to the border of the kingdom to resume his old trade. After temporarily leaving his family, he packed his luggage and prepared to leave. He was ready to eat porridge and live in a tent. As for the lack of manpower and money, that was a common problem during construction. Lysia also didn't intend to stay in Border Town for a long time. He wanted to see Carl, his old friend of many years, as well as his fellow stonemasons who were either exiled or living in seclusion. But the reality was always so incredible. After arriving at the town by boat, he met Carl van Bate at the dock, an outstanding mason in Greycastle King's City and a strong competitor for the next leader of the Mason Guild. Compared to his appearance in Roland's memory, there was white hair at his temples and a few more wrinkles on his face. However, his body was not thin, but a lot stronger, and his face was even glossy. After greeting him, Carl did not take him to the noisy and messy construction site. Instead, he led him to a obviously newly built residential building. He handed over a key and said, "This house is yours. Put your luggage down first, and let's go to the pub for a drink." Then Lysia heard a series of incredible stories from the other party. Carl was recruited by the Lord to work in City Hall as a civilian. He became an official with a fixed monthly salary, and he was also the director of the construction department. If he stayed, he could also work in City Hall. He would get a free house. After 10 years of work, he could get a retirement allowance. What was a retirement allowance? Even if he did not work, he could still get money. Lysia thought that Carl was drunk at that time, but he did not expect that what he said was true. "Sir, the ore is melting, and I see molten iron flowing." The worker at the top of the furnace shouted. "Open the slag outlet and discharge the slag." After getting to work, none of the problems that Lysia had envisioned appeared. Not only did the higher-ups give him people, they also gave him money. Moreover, they gave him money very quickly. Often after the application was made, he would get a reply the next day. In addition, there was also an alchemy material called cement, which could quickly bond bricks and stones, so the construction speed was improved by leaps and bounds. He felt a kind of unprecedented joy here. In just a month, Lysia built 5 furnaces with air bags and 3 shaft furnaces for smelting iron. The shaft furnace in front of him was the work that he had been thinking about for many years after he left the Mason Guild. He thought that it could only be passed down in the form of drawings, but he did not expect that it would become a finished product one day. This improved shaft furnace was nearly 2 meters high, and its inner diameter was about 75 centimeters. There were many air nozzles at the lower part of the furnace body, which could be used to blast and draw air. At the bottom, there was a slag outlet and an outlet for molten iron to flow out. Next to the shaft furnace, there was a slope made of sand and stones, which made it convenient for the workers to add materials and observe the situation inside the furnace. Today was the day that the first shaft furnace was officially put into use. Before opening the furnace, a smelting test had to be done according to the usual practice. After opening the slag outlet for more than 10 times and adding charcoal to the furnace 2 times, the test basically passed. There was molten iron in the furnace, and the slag outlet was unimpeded. The temperature at the moment was also enough to meet the smelting needs, so there was no need to continue to waste charcoal. After all, in order to reduce wastage, the first test used the waste ores in the corner of the yard. After opening the iron outlet to discharge the melted molten iron, Lysia announced that the furnace would be stopped. 2 days later, the townspeople who cleaned the furnace dug out a few dark stones. Under the high temperature, the other waste ores had shrunk several times, but these pieces of ores had not changed when they were first thrown in. Instead, their surface was brighter, and they were as black as ink. Lysia could not determine what kind of ore it was. He could say that it was useless waste ores, but its shape and appearance were really pleasing, and it did not seem useless. But if it was useful, how could it be made into a tool if it could not be smelted? After thinking about it, he simply picked out the most square-shaped ore, wrapped it in cloth, and asked his men to go to the castle and give it to the lord of Border Town, Roland Wimbledon. Chapter 183. What is this? Nightingale looked at the shiny black stone on the table and asked. Obsidian. Roland didn't even raise his head, concentrating on drawing the blueprint in his hand. Black, what stone? No, I'm talking nonsense. He sighed, just looking at the shape and color, who knows what kind of stone this is. He didn't study geological exploration, he may not be able to distinguish pure metal in front of him, let alone ores. The little knowledge he had in his head told him that ores were mostly complex compounds with different impurities and different colors. Take iron ores for example. Hematite, pyrite, and siderite, in terms of appearance, could be said to be thousands of miles apart. Pyrite, in particular, would sometimes show a light yellow metallic luster. It was often mistaken for gold, which was why it had the nickname of fool's gold. As for heat resistance, compounds have no fixed melting point, it is also related to impurities and composition, so it can't be distinguished by temperature alone. Moreover, metal elements exist in the ionic state, without knowing the method of purification, it is useless to burn it. You also don't know something? Nightingale was surprised. There is a lot. Roland put down the quill and made himself a cup of black tea. Do you want to drink? No, she waved her hand. By the way, beef jerky is not as delicious as grilled fish, in the future you should put fish in your drawer. Roland was silent for a moment, he decided to pretend he didn't hear this sentence. He also planned to give this stone to the chief alchemist Kyle Sichi to deal with. Minerals more or less have a certain degree of radioactivity, it is not a good choice to put it in the office as a decoration. Recently, after the evolution of Soroya's ability, he found that he can suddenly make a lot more things. First is the tap water system, which can greatly improve the happiness of the residents. Think about it, after a busy day returning home sweaty, want to wash your sticky body, only to find that the water tank is empty, and you have to go to the nearby well to fetch water. This feeling must be terrible. Moreover, Roland was also very tired of the process of scooping water from the water tank to wash his face and hands. He always felt that if the water was left in the tank for a few days, parasites would grow. Not to mention that the water tank was rarely cleaned once a month. If he looked carefully, he could even see the accumulated scales at the bottom of the tank floating like caterpillars. If they used a water tower to supply water, there would not be any technical difficulties. They would use a steam engine to pump the water from the Redwater River into the water tower, and then rely on the siphon principle to flow through the pipes to every household, thus forming an automatic water supply system. The reason why Roland had never put it into practice was because of the materials. Water supply pipes were either made of iron or copper. If the iron pipes were not treated with anti-rust treatment, they would be scrapped after a few years. Copper pipes were the perfect water supply pipes. They were resistant to corrosion, did not form scales on the inner walls, were non-toxic, and even had the effect of sterilizing copper ions. But to use the metal used to make money as a water supply. The output of the North Slope mine was far from this level of luxury. Even in the future, copper pipes were only considered for high-end residences. At present, Border Town was not only unable to export minerals, but also had to import metal ingots. Therefore, whether it was iron pipes or copper pipes, Roland was reluctant to use them to create a water supply system that could not be used for profit. But now it was different. With Soroya's coating, it meant that he could use his magic to produce water pipes. For example, he could take an iron pipe as a mold, wrap it with paper, and then let Soroya cover it with the coating. After pulling out the mold, it would become a pipe. Even if such a pipe could not withstand pressure, as long as it was placed in a covered pipe ditch, it would be fine. Next was the power supply system. I'm afraid that in a short period of time there would be no way to popularize the whole town, but making the castle full of light was something that Roland had always wanted to achieve. Reading with a weak candle was too painful, and it also caused great damage to the eyes. Plus, summer was coming. What kind of feeling would it be to light torches and candles on a hot and muggy night? Now that there were generators and wires, it would not be so far before the castle entered the electrical age. As for the filament of the light bulb, he vaguely remembered that before the use of tungsten filament, people generally used carbonized bamboo filament to make incandescent lamps. Bamboo was not a rare thing, it could be found in the woodlands south of the Redwater River. However, what Border Town currently needed the most was an iron smelting facility. The output of iron was directly related to the scale of mechanical production and weapon manufacturing, and it was also the foundation of the town's survival. What you drew is a tower. Nightingale sat at the table and asked curiously. Almost, Roland nodded. But it is empty inside, it is used to fill fuel and ore. Its function is the same as a shaft furnace, it can smelt iron or into pig iron. This was an upgraded version of the ancient shaft furnace. He had been to the construction site of the shaft furnace designed and manufactured by Lozia. To tell the truth, apart from its small capacity and low temperature, the structure of the furnace was very close to that of a blast furnace. If it were not for Soroya's evolution, which gave the town the ability to produce refractory bricks, he would have built 10 more such shaft furnaces. But with refractory bricks, he naturally had to consider a furnace with a higher furnace temperature and a higher output. The height of the newly designed furnace was nearly 8 meters, 4 times that of a shaft furnace. The furnace body was tower-shaped, with a maximum internal diameter of 3 meters. In order to prevent collapse, there was a support frame at the bottom. The furnace wall was thin at the top and thick at the bottom. The belly was half a meter thick, and the innermost layer was made of Soroya's brand-coated fireproof bricks. At the same time, it was equipped with a circle of air supply vents for the steam engine to pump air into the belly of the furnace. In order to make full use of the power of the steam engine, Roland also designed a set of automatic feeding equipment for the blast furnace, including a climbing rail and a special feeding cart with a movable door at the bottom. After the cart climbed to the top of the furnace under the traction of the steam engine, the buckle at the bottom of the cart would be hooked, so that the fuel or ore would be poured into the furnace. For this era, this system could be regarded as the top technology. Unlike the shaft furnace with a large opening and low heat, once the blast furnace was put into production, it would not stop for a long time. It needed a continuous supply of fuel and ore, and its output was much higher than that of a shaft furnace. As long as 5 or 6 such blast furnaces were built, the town's pig iron output would double. After drawing all the blueprints, Roland rubbed his numb wrists, took out a box from under the table, and pushed it in front of her. Nightingale was startled. This is... Well, I originally planned to give it to you earlier, but it took some time to carve the pattern. After all, I'm not very familiar with the machines in the factory. Roland smiled. Open it and take a look. She reached out to open the box, and couldn't help but let out a gasp of surprise. Inside, she saw 2 revolvers placed on both sides of the box. Different from the prototype used by Carter on the day of the competition, these 2 revolvers were shining with a silver light, and their surfaces were so shiny that it could reflect a person's shadow. The handles and the body of the guns were engraved with exquisite patterns, and the barrel was also printed with Nightingale's name, "To Veronica." This plan had been brewing in Roland's mind for a long time. Compared to the inconvenient and troublesome front-loading flintlock, the newly developed revolvers were already quite perfect. Whether it was safety or firing rate, they were all maintained at a relatively high level. For a witch with such high mobility like Nightingale, what kind of power could the guns display in her hands? He was looking forward to it. Thank you, she smiled, picked up the 2 revolvers, jumped off the table, and made a shooting posture. Will you teach me how to use them? Chapter 184. Scroll stood at the door of the bedroom and hesitated for a moment before she pushed the door open and entered. Vendi was sitting at the table with a sad face holding a book. She didn't need to look carefully to guess that the book must be Natural Science Theoretical Foundation. Scroll couldn't help but chuckle. She rarely saw her show such an expression. Even when the Witch Cooperation Association was trapped in the impassable mountain range and was short of supplies, she still smiled and cheered for each of her sisters, as if she had never worried about those hardships. She didn't expect that a book would make her so distressed. "You can't understand it at all, right?" Scroll said, "The first time I read a book, it was the same." "I thought it was Nightingale." Vendi heard the voice and turned her head. "What about now?" "I still can't understand it." "Fortunately, you and I are the same." Vendi sighed, "Not to mention Anna, I didn't expect that even Soroya would comprehend a new ability. I feel that if I don't work hard, I will be surpassed by the younger generation. I really don't understand how His Highness knows so much. He can describe the invisible world as if it is real." "In fact, he doesn't know much," Scroll shrugged. "I mean in some aspects." Such as Nightingale." She pulled out a stool and sat next to Vendi. "Have you noticed that her current behavior is very different from before? When protecting His Highness, she rarely hides her figure. Even when she goes out, she only wears a hood, and she even listens to the class at night. You live in the same bedroom with her, so you should know better than me. Can you tell me what happened in the end?" "In fact, it's nothing." Vendi shook her head. "It's her own choice." Her attitude made Scroll somewhat surprised. "Choice?" "Well, it's just as you guessed." Vendi closed the book and said bluntly, "She likes His Highness Roland Wimbledon. Of course, this can be seen without guessing. The person who provides protection to the witches will, over time, gain the witches' favor. In the journey of the Witch Cooperation Association, this kind of rumor is not uncommon. That's a story made up by others. Most of the sisters didn't end up well. Prince Roland is different from them." Scroll was startled. She didn't expect that Vendi, who had held the same view as her not long ago, would say such a thing. "You know, witches can't give birth, and the prince can't." "The prince will take a witch as his wife," Wendy said, spreading her hands. "Moreover, he told you himself." "How did she know?" Could it be that Nightingale was there at the time? Scroll suddenly understood something. "Are you blaming me for hiding it from you?" "No, Vendi, I didn't say it because I didn't want this matter to be leaked out. It would have a negative impact on His Royal Highness' road to the throne." Vendi was silent for a while before she said, "I know, I'm not blaming you, because I said the same thing to Nightingale. Before knowing this matter, I thought that the sisters wouldn't have a result, but since the prince doesn't mind, do we still have to force them to change their minds? Compared to Nightingale, who suppresses her feelings and is depressed, I prefer to see her like this. No matter what the final result is, at least she followed her heart." So that's how it is, Scroll thought. Although she agreed with the idea of not spreading the news, she didn't want to stop the feelings of the sisters. She didn't want to arbitrarily make a choice for them. Unlike Kara, Vendi always looked from the sisters' point of view, cheering for their remaining courage. But, does His Royal Highness know this? Scroll suddenly thought of a serious problem. What if his wish is based on not knowing that witches can't give birth? Well. Vendi also lowered her voice. "How about, you go and ask." Outside the western border city wall. The approaching summer sun shone brightly on the grassland, and in the distance, herds of cattle and sheep could be seen leisurely eating grass. It was hard to imagine that 3 months ago, this place was still covered with ice and snow, and there was nothing but terrible and ferocious demonic beasts. The shooting training had lasted for most of the afternoon, and the speed at which Nightingale mastered shooting skills was much faster than Roland had expected. Probably everyone has a different talent, he thought, and some people are born to fight. Now, her posture of reloading, aiming, and shooting was completely different from that of a novice. If she was born in a knight family, she would definitely become the top star knight in Greycastle, Carter couldn't help but praise, just like me. Fortunately, she didn't. I don't want her arms to become as thick as yours. Roland glanced at him. How does it feel to fight an extraordinary to a draw? The moment I was hit, I even thought that I was fighting with a battering ram, and my whole chest felt like it was smashed. Carter said honestly, to tell you the truth, it was terrible. There shouldn't be a next time, he laughed. After another round of standing shooting, the prince applauded Nightingale. So far, it's very good. Next, let's do a simulation training. Nightingale put the pistol into her belt and walked to the prince's side. In the bright sunshine, the sweat on the tip of her nose sparkled. Do you see those targets? Roland pointed to the 5 half-body targets not far away. They have God's stones of retaliation hanging on them. You should be able to see them clearly in the state of fog. The next thing you need to do is to combine your ability with your gun and knock down these enemies in the shortest time possible. Because in the state of fog, objects and space were always changing, it was difficult to ensure that the bullets were flying towards the target. She had tried to shoot directly in the fog, but the result was that 9 out of 10 bullets rushed out of the fog and changed their trajectory, and 1 bullet almost hit Roland, who was standing behind her. Therefore, when shooting, Nightingale had to get out of the fog, and the shorter the time of exposure, the harder it was for the enemy to counterattack. Understood. She smiled, raised her cloak with one hand, and disappeared in front of the two. When the first gunshot sounded, Roland only saw a white figure quietly appear, followed by an eruption of flames and gas, and the target was smashed. Before the splashing sawdust completely fell to the ground, she had already reached the back of the second target, and pulled the trigger at a range of 3 or 4 meters. Then the third target, the fourth target. Every time she shot, she was not even completely out of the fog. Apart from the silver pistol and the sudden flash of fire, Roland could not see any more details, and it was even difficult for him to catch her position with his eyes. Nightingale jumped in the fog as if she was teleporting. This kind of scene could only be seen in the movies. In the blink of an eye, the 5 targets had all been smashed. He blinked, and Nightingale returned to his side. "How is it?" she asked with a smile. Roland looked at the dumbfounded Carter and asked, "What do you think?" "I'm afraid no one can catch Miss Nightingale." Chief Knight took a deep breath, "even if it's ashes wearing the God's stone of retaliation." "So, do I graduate?" She wiped the sweat from her nose and wiped it on Roland. Chapter 185. The Swan sailed westward along the Redwater River. May stood at the bow and looked straight ahead. She didn't want to enjoy the scenery, she just wanted to see the pier of Border Town as soon as possible. "How long until we reach our destination?" she asked impatiently. "Soon, Miss May. It's too hot here." "You'd better go back to the cabin and rest," Gates said behind her. She didn't need to look to know that he must be smiling ingratiatingly at the moment. Looking back, May found that it was true. "When you told me before, it was already soon, and now it's still soon. Have you ever been to Border Town?" He was speechless for a long time, and finally scratched his head. "The last time I was here was 10 years ago. Longsong's stronghold can change its master in 1 year, let alone 10 years. May said angrily. "But there are exceptions. I don't think you've changed much. 10 years is the same as 1 day, and you still can't get on the stage." Seeing him retreating with a stiff smile, she finally felt a little better. If it weren't for the news from Irene, she really wouldn't want to go to Border Town with this group of acrobats. As the star actress of Longsong Stronghold Theatre, she was quite famous throughout the Western region. This time, she was invited by the Tower Theatre to go to Grey Castle to perform A Prince's Search for Love. The performance was a great success, and even the drama master Mr. Cajun Fells praised her for playing the role of the martyr princess. Although she wasn't playing the heroine, she left a deep impression on the audience. But when she returned to Longsong Stronghold in high spirits, she found that the place had changed dramatically. Duke Ryan was defeated and killed, and the stronghold fell into the hands of Prince Roland Wimbledon. Currently, Perot Hull of the Honeysuckle family was temporarily in charge. She had been away for less than a year, and the western region had become strange. Fortunately, the upper-class political turmoil has little impact on the theater. If that were the case, May and her sisters would only be able to talk about it a little after dinner. However, the news that the first knight of the Western region, the Light of Dawn, has been captured suddenly grips her heart. May immediately rushed to the theater, wanting to find Irene to ask about the situation, only to find that she had also gone to Border Town half a month ago, probably to reunite with her husband. This news made May feel disappointed and a little envious at the same time. They both worked in the theater, but she was the well-deserved leading actress, while Irene was a newcomer who had not yet made a name for herself. The title of The Flower of Tomorrow only came from the mutual flattery of a group of miscellaneous actors. In terms of appearance, she was confident that she would not lose to Irene. In terms of family background, although she was from a common family, Irene was just an orphan adopted by the theater, so she was much better than Irene. However, it was difficult for May to forget that the Light of Dawn, Philin Eltek, had fallen in love with the naive Irene. Later, in order to marry her, he did not hesitate to give up the inheritance of the family. "Look, the farmland," someone shouted. "We're not far from Border Town." May looked to the left side of the ship and saw rows of knee-high wheat stalks swaying in the wind. Farmers wearing straw hats were busy in the fields, as if they were in a green sea. The wheat fields, accompanied by the sparkling river, extended westward, as far as the eye could see. "This scenery is really beautiful, Miss May." Rosia came over and nodded to her. "I didn't expect that in this remote place, we would be able to see vast farmland that is not inferior to Longsong Stronghold." "Compared to King's City, this is nothing," May disapprovingly said. "In King's City, the wheat fields can even connect the two cities. Along the way, there is nothing but wheat and more wheat. It's so boring." "Is that so?" She smiled awkwardly. "I have never been to such a far place." Well, this is the reaction that an ordinary person should have, May thought. If Irene heard these words, I'm afraid that she would only show an envious expression and ask me to tell more. "Rest assured, you will have the opportunity to go in the future." "I hope so." Rosia patted her chest. "Thank you for your encouragement. I'm saying that you only need to spend a few silver royals, and you can hitch a ride with a caravan to King's City. I'm not saying that you can also go to King's City to perform in a play." May rolled her eyes in her heart. However, the other party was, after all, Irene's good friend, so May was too lazy to say all of these things. Rosia had joined the theater earlier than her, and was about the same age as herself. However, because of her plain appearance and poor memory, she had never been able to get the opportunity to perform on the stage. In addition to Irene, there were only a few people in the theater who were willing to pay attention to her. "Does Irene know that we will arrive today?" May asked. "I gave her a reply in the letter, and she should be waiting for us at the pier." "That's good," she nodded. "I don't want to look for a hotel alone in a strange town." "Can I ask you something, Miss May?" "Miss May," Rosia hesitated for a moment, "why do you want to go with us to Border Town? Moreover, why do you want to hide it from the theater? Irene's letter said that there might be an opportunity to perform here, but you don't lack opportunities. If I told the truth, do you think the theater would let me come to this damn place?" May curled her lips. "As for why I want to come here, I just want to see how my theater companions are doing." She didn't know why she made such an impulsive decision. Longsong Stronghold Theater had a big play to perform in the next 2 days, and if she left now, she was afraid that the theater owner would have a headache. Although there were still a few backup actresses, without her, the nobles might not buy it, and if it was serious, they might even protest to the theater. To be honest, this was not a wise choice. May was very clear about this. No matter how big her reputation was, she still had to rely on the theater to survive. If she annoyed the theater owner, he would simply put her in the cold storage and try to promote a new actress, and she would have no other way. Either she compromised and admitted her mistake, or she could only leave this place and compete with the other theater's pillars. Otherwise, after seeing Philin, should I immediately take a ship back to Longsong Stronghold? May thought. So that's how it is, Rosia nodded and said, when Irene sees you, she will certainly be very surprised. The scenery on the riverbank gradually became richer, and on the side of the impassable mountain range, there were many more tents and wooden houses. At this time, it was almost noon, and the farmers were busy cooking porridge and stewing soup. Smoke rose from the residential area, and May could occasionally smell the fragrance of wheat. Children gathered by the river to play, and those who were good at swimming would take off all their clothes, plunge into the river amidst the cheers of their companions, and then triumphantly climb up to the shore. May finally saw the long-awaited dock. After the Swan docked, Gate and Sam volunteered to take care of all the ladies' luggage. The group had just walked down the pier when Rosia excitedly shouted, "Irene!" May followed the direction of the other side's shout, only to see a woman wearing a white dress waving at them from the pier, and standing next to her was a tall man. Even though separated by a long distance, she could still see from his tall and sturdy figure that he was extraordinary. The Light of Dawn, Philin Eltek. Chapter 186. As soon as she saw him, May immediately threw the idea of returning to the back of her mind. "Oh my God, May! May!" After approaching, Irene exclaimed in disbelief, and then grabbed her hand and pulled her in front of the knight. "Dear, do you know who she is? She is the most famous actress in the Stronghold Theater, Miss May. The number of people who want to see her performance can line up from the theater hall to the street." Although the word "dear" made May's heart skip a beat, her habit of acting made her smile reflexively, and she nodded slightly. "Hello. Of course I know her. You said she is the most famous actress. Who in the Western region doesn't know the name of the star of the theater?" He sighed and apologized to May. "My wife was rude. I am Philin, hello." He did not give his name, identity, and even his surname was hidden. A surge of sadness surged in May's heart, but she still maintained the most elegant appearance on the surface. "I know you. The first knight of the Western region, the Light of Dawn, Sir Philin Eltek. Because of the busy rehearsal, I couldn't attend your and Irene's wedding. It's really a pity. That's all in the past." The knight smiled and shook his head. "I am a teacher now, and no longer a member of the Eltek family. You don't have to be so polite." After that, he waved to the others and said, "Let's go back and talk. I have already applied for a place to stay." "Teacher?" May was startled. Does he mean the court tutor? The lord of this town was indeed a prince, but no matter how poor the prince was, he would not ask the knight to take on this position. And what does it mean to apply for a place to stay? Shouldn't Irene be the one to bring them to a safe and reliable hotel? Before she could think about these questions, Irene had already come over and said, "Oh my God, I really didn't expect you to come here. If you acted in Cinderella, it would definitely cause a sensation." "Really?" May could not deny it. She had never heard of the name of a play before. It was probably written by a new playwright. Besides, she didn't have time to rehearse. She came here, just to see how the Light of Dawn was doing. Maybe she could help him. After entering the town, May found something strange. This was clearly a barren town located outside the border, acting as an outpost of a fortress. Why did it look like a new city? The road was covered with grayish-black gravel, and not a single bit of mud could be seen. Moreover, the road was too wide, almost enough for two carriages to pass side by side. "What road is this?" Sam asked the question that had been on her mind. "It's strangely flat." Hee, Irene smiled proudly. "When I first came here, this place was covered in mud, and now it has become like this. Also, this is not a road. I heard from those masons that this is only the foundation of a road." "They're just bluffing," Rosia retorted. "Only a house needs a foundation. Things lying on the ground will not collapse, so why would they need a foundation?" "It's true, they use a kind of gray powder mixed with stones to make it flat. After sprinkling water, they use a stone roller to press it back and forth until the ground is flat. At first, I thought this was a new way of building a road, but the masons said that this was the method that His Highness the Prince had instructed them to do." It seems to be called water or something. In short, it's just the foundation. Irene was leading the way with her hands behind her back, her long braids swaying back and forth. In the future, when there are more people and carriages, this place will be paved with slabs. That is the real road. Slabs, May sneered in her heart. Apart from the inner city of King's City, which other city could pave an entire area with slabs? Having such a wide and flat road was already good enough. Even in Longsong's stronghold, there was still a lot of muddy ground. As they went deeper into the town, she saw that many houses on both sides of the road were being demolished. There were mud tile houses and wooden houses. Although they weren't new houses, they were far from being uninhabitable. Were they driven away by the Lord because they were blocking the street? No, they all moved to a residential area. A residential area? May asked, what is that? A newly built residential area. Inside, there are exactly the same brick and stone houses, Irene explained. All the original residents will be able to get their own house. At that time, there will be no more leaky houses in the town. Everyone can get their own brick and stone house. May couldn't believe her ears. This was even more exaggerated than the slabs. In the end, did she even have an idea of the cost of building such a house? Since she couldn't say anything in front of Philin, May had to swallow her words. There were many pedestrians on the street, and they would occasionally stop to greet Irene and Philin. May found that Irene seemed to be a so-called teacher. Aren't you going to perform a play here? She asked. Why do the townspeople call you Teacher Irene? That's my job. The play is just a part-time job. There is no theater in this town. Irene told them about His Royal Highness summons. Although it's an open-air performance and the audience is civilians, the salary is calculated according to the stronghold standard. I think this is a good opportunity, at least I can train myself. Yes, I'm very satisfied to be able to go on stage. Gate and Sam nodded. An open-air performance for civilians. May simply didn't have the strength to speak. Compared to Irene, she was even more confused as to what His Royal Highness, who had come up with this idea, was planning to do in the end. Could those people who lived every day just to eat understand the love and twists and turns in the drama? In this way, they arrived in front of a 2-story building. This is the teacher's building, but there are currently only 9 teachers in Border Town, so there are still a lot of vacant rooms. Philin has applied for the temporary right to live in 2 houses for you. During the performance, you can live here. Irene handed out 2 keys. Gate and Sam can live in one room, Rosia and Tina can live in the other, and Miss May, I'll live with you, May said. But, I came here to see how my colleagues in the theater are doing, she said with a smile. After all, we've worked together in the theater for so long, and you probably won't return to Stronghold. I want to talk to you more. You won't dislike me, will you? Of course not. Irene happily held her hand. I'm just worried that the room is too small for you. I also have a lot of questions about the performance that I want to ask you. Then she turned her head and said to the other 4 people, let's put down our luggage first, and then go to my house and read the script together. May climbed to the 2nd floor and followed Irene and Philin into their new home. Her last shred of hope was shattered. Although she didn't want to admit it, this small room did reveal a comfortable and clean feeling. The tablecloths and curtains were obviously newly purchased, they were all thin red and white cotton. The floor was swept very clean, and there was a linen carpet in the living room. There were a few strange cups on the low table in the living room, which attracted May's attention at first glance. She went forward and picked one up to examine it carefully, but she couldn't immediately recognize its material. It was light, a bit like wood, but the surface was smooth and the color was full and gorgeous. It didn't look like a cheap product that ordinary people could afford. There was also a pattern on the cup, which seemed to be 2 puppets intimately touching each other. It's a beautiful cup, isn't it? Irene came up and said, but it's too expensive. It's sold at the convenience market for 5 silver royals each, and 4 are counted as a set. The people in the pattern are all in different poses. Philin said it was to celebrate payday and insisted on buying it for me. In the end, he used up all his pay. That fool. Convenience market. May deliberately ignored the latter half of the other party's sentence. Yes. She nodded. The Lord opened a market in the town square, selling some very exquisite daily necessities, but the price is not low at all. I can take you to see it tomorrow. May had mixed feelings. Everything was completely different from what she had expected. She had thought that as a defeated and captured knight without a ransom, even if he was released by the Lord, his life would be very difficult. Irene usually didn't have much savings, so other than accompanying him in suffering, she couldn't help him in any way. At this time, any help she gave to Philin Eltek would be a timely help. If she could go a step further and use her influence to persuade the local lord to let her redeem the first knight, she might be able to completely change the knight's heart. But, she found that all her ideas were in vain. The other party didn't need her help at all, and could also live well in Border Town. So should she go back? She chose to leave this place and forget Philin and Border Town together. Chapter 187. When summer came, Marjorie's inland river fleet arrived at Border Town. Roland deliberately received the businesswoman at the dock and checked the goods she had brought. The most important thing was the 3 full ships of saltpeter. Now the gunpowder in Border Town had basically been exhausted, and even the First Army's shooting practice had been stopped. Although the revolving rifles had begun to be equipped on a small scale, they were only used to practice reloading, gun maintenance, and reloading ammunition. Now with this batch of saltpeter, they could finally resume the live shooting practice. In addition to the saltpeter, she also brought 2 ships of ore ingots, mainly iron and copper, as well as some green vitriol ore. It would take 2 or 3 days to unload these goods. Roland also placed the 2 steam engines in a conspicuous position in the yard, and as usual, draped them in red satin and tied a big red flower for Marjorie's inspection. In fact, the Western Industrial Company had only managed to piece together 1 steam engine in nearly a month, and this was built on the basis of hundreds of scrapped parts. So Roland had to let Anna reprocess the defective parts that didn't deviate too much, so that the second steam engine could be delivered on time. To Roland's surprise, Marjorie didn't come alone this time, she also brought a merchant group from King's City. After the delivery of the goods, Marjorie and her party followed Roland back to the castle and enjoyed a sumptuous lunch in the living room. "Your Royal Highness, this is Hogg, my old friend, and also one of the top mining merchants in King's City." Marjorie introduced them one by one. "This is Gammon, who, like Marlin, belongs to the Crescent Moon Bay Caravan. Their main business is the sea trade between Greycastle and the fjords. They are all very interested in the steam engine. I have known them for many years, so I was embarrassed to sell them at a higher price, so I brought them to introduce them to you. Greetings to you, Your Royal Highness." Hogg, who had a big belly and an oily face, opened his mouth. "I heard from Margaret that this machine can replace manpower, and can quickly pump water and transport ore from the mine. Moreover, it also has extraordinary strength, and doesn't need to rest all day. Can I see it with my own eyes?" "Of course." Roland took a sip of the wine. At first, he couldn't get used to the sour taste, but now he was getting used to it. "But if you wanted to carry the ore, you need to install a rail system. After lunch, I can take you to the North Slope mine." "Your Highness, I'm very curious about the use of the steam engine you've described. Can it really be installed on a sailboat and drive the ship forward instead of sails?" Marlin opened his mouth and asked, "What if it's a 3-masted or 4-masted ship?" "I'm afraid it doesn't have enough strength. Steam engines are the same as horses. Some are strong and some are weak, depending on the model they are made. Of course, machines with higher output were naturally more expensive. Also, if one isn't enough, we can have 2 or even 4, Roland replied with a smile. Putting a steam engine on a ship, even the most primitive paddle steamer, involved a complex system of power, transmission, and control. Apart from Border Town, there was no other place in Grey Castle that had the technical strength to modify it. And to modify such a ship, the cost would inevitably be much more than the steam engine itself. That being the case, the Crescent Moon Bay Caravan would also like to order this machine from you. Gammon forked a steamed bun that had just come out of the steamer and stuffed it into his mouth. His eyes were squinted by the fragrant gravy. Sure enough, birds of a feather flocked together. A rich man's friend is still a rich man. He didn't even look at the actual effect and directly made the order, as if he didn't care about the thousands of golden dragons. Roland shook his head. Unfortunately, Border Town is short of manpower. Plus, the manufacture of a steam engine is very complicated. Before completing Marjorie's order, I'm afraid it will be difficult to make additional machines. I can provide you with manpower, Your Highness. Gammon patted his chest. Whether it's carpenters, blacksmiths, or even shipbuilders, I have a lot of them at the port. Moreover, I don't have to pay for them. And then let them learn the manufacturing method for you to use? Hogg interrupted. No. Of course not. He widened his eyes. How could I dare to play such a trick in front of His Royal Highness? 10 years, Your Highness, he opened his palms. I'm willing to let them work for you for 10 years, and I'll pay for them. I only have one request, and that is to give priority to the Crescent Moon Bay Caravan when they manufacture the steam engine. This is an interesting proposal, Roland thought. It's similar to the technology partnership of later generations, where I only provide the technology and earn the most. Of course, the other party can also get the steam engine as soon as possible, and after 10 years, they can also get a group of technicians. The salary of the workers for 10 years is equivalent to the cost of purchasing the technology. There's no need to rush into a decision. We can slowly discuss these details after seeing the real thing. Roland pressed his hand down. Moreover, I don't only have the steam engine here that is worth buying. There are some things that I think you will also be interested in, such as this. He snapped his fingers, and the guard next to him moved a large pile of things from the wooden box at his feet, and placed them on the table one by one. These are the new products of Border Town. No matter what it is, they are all of high quality, and the price is reasonable. For example, this is the simplest mug, Roland said, pointing to the colorful cups on the table. It's light, beautiful, and not as fragile as a crystal cup. The pattern on it can be customized, and it won't get wet, so it's very easy to clean. It won't get wet? Marjorie picked up a cup and carefully looked at it. You can try it with wine, the prince joked. After drinking it, you can pretend to be drunk and throw it on the ground. If it breaks, I'll pay for it. This workmanship, gee, it's really exquisite. I'm afraid that not every cup can be guaranteed to be of such quality, right? The big-bellied hog had already filled his own cup with wine, and drank it in one gulp. Hey, it's actually dry. Of course it was dry. It was essentially an ordinary wooden cup, but it was covered with a layer of Soroya's painting, and the patterns on it were all designed by herself. It doesn't conflict with a crystal cup. Compared to a formal palace banquet, it's more suitable to appear in the boudoir of a rich young lady. Roland said, as far as I know, they have no resistance to things with bright colors and beautiful shapes. I also think so. Marjorie nodded with interest. You seem to have a lot of experience. Ahem, the prince coughed twice, and look at this, a complete breastplate with a uniform thickness, a total of 2 pieces, both made of wrought iron. Compared to the knight's plate armor, it's not only light, but it can also be worn by one person, and when closed, there's no gap. It's suitable for caravan guards without squires. The most important thing is, it's cheaper than plate armor. After introducing all the products, the merchants couldn't help but whisper to each other. Roland simply gave them a period of free discussion, got up and left the hall, going to the garden corridor to relax. Your Royal Highness, I haven't seen you for a month, but you have a lot of new things here. Marjorie also followed him out. don't you want to exchange opinions with them? No, I don't need to listen to other people's opinions when I see something, whether it's a product or a person, it's the same. She smiled and shook her head. The caravan will probably stay here for 3 or 4 days. Can you let me see lightning again? Although she didn't recognize you, at least she didn't show any dislike last time, so I think there's no problem. Thank you, Marjorie said gratefully. It's nothing, Roland smiled. Oh yes, since you're staying here for so long, why don't you come and see a play? 3 days later, the town will hold its first theatrical performance. In just 1 month, you've built a theater? She asked in surprise. Of course not. This is an open-air performance, right in the middle of the town square. I think it will certainly be different. Chapter 188. After a field visit to the North Slope mine and 2 consecutive days of negotiations, Roland reached a new trade contract with Hogg and the Crescent Moon Bay Caravan. Hogg's eyes almost popped out of their sockets when he saw the high-speed operation of the ore transportation system. He even proposed to invest money to build a factory in Border Town, specializing in the construction of mine tracks and supporting equipment, and split the profits equally, but was rejected by Roland. Attracting investment was something that could only be done when there were many people. What the town lacked now was people, not money. After all, Hogg was only a mining businessman. Although he owned several mines and managed an open-air silver mine for Earl Kambala in Silver City, he could only provide miners, which was much worse than the strength of the Crescent Moon Bay Caravan, who owned an island. In the end, he signed a contract to order steam engines 6 months later, the same number of 10, and a complete mine transport system, including tracks and mine cars. Half of it would be delivered before the months of the demons, and the rest would be made up for next year. The tone of the Crescent Moon Bay Caravan was much bigger, and Gammon directly signed a 10-year contract. When the caravan came next time, he would bring a team of 300 people, mainly composed of blacksmiths and carpenters. The remuneration of these people would be paid by the Crescent Moon Bay, and Roland only needed to provide accommodation and food. The steam engines they produced in the next 10 years would be sold to the Crescent Moon Bay first, and after 10 years, they would voluntarily decide whether to stay or leave. This point was negotiated repeatedly by Roland. There was no doubt that there would be confidence of the caravan in this group of people, and even with this, the other side would inevitably choose as many people as possible who were loyal to the Crescent Moon Bay, and when the time came, it was unknown whether half of them would decide to stay. But for Roland, skilled workers were always not enough, and leaving 10% was a profit. He was never worried about technical advantages, but worried that no one would come to transform his technology into practical products. In addition to the steam engine, the second big order came from the transformation of ships. Together with the 300 craftsmen, there were also 2 river sailboats. The Crescent Moon Bay Caravan hoped that Border Town could transform them into steam-powered paddle steamers. The transformation fee for a single boat was as high as 1,800 Golden Dragon coins. The 2 boats added together directly exceeded Marjorie's steam engine order. In contrast, although the mug had received 3 orders, the total amount was less than 300 Golden Dragon, and that was when Roland raised the price 10 times higher than the convenience store. He couldn't help but sigh at the difference in profits between industrial products and civilian products. If he couldn't mass-produce them, civilian products would just satisfy the needs of the town's residents. To the prince's surprise, the iron breastplates and the iron farming tools were neglected. Later, it was during dinner that Marjorie answered his doubts. Although your breastplate is indeed cheaper, the production is too small. If you resell it, after deducting the transportation costs and taxes, you might only make 5 or 6 Golden Dragons worth of profit. Also, your armor was forged by a hydraulic hammer, right? Or a steam engine. In any case, the price of this armor is very fixed. It's expensive because of the high-quality iron, not because of the labor. She paused. It's even less necessary to buy it for your own use. Sea merchants, whether guards or sailors, rarely wear heavy iron armor, which will make them sink quickly when they fall into the water. Most of the time, the armor is a shackle for them, not protection. The same is true for farming tools. If you can't get a lot of cheap iron, even if it's cheap, it won't be much cheaper. Compared with the local similar goods, it's difficult to form an advantage. Unlike those colorful cups, the price is completely uncertain. If you meet a nobleman who likes it, you may be able to earn several times the price. I see. Roland thought about it and found that it was true. For goods with stable prices like armor and farming tools, it was difficult to push down the price too much when the material cost was a large part. He was cheap because the steam engine forging was more efficient than the water hammer. Unfortunately, this price difference was not enough to attract the interest of big businessmen. Moreover, the white plate armor with Soroya's piercing coating was also part of the First Army's change of equipment. Before the iron production increased, it was impossible to sell it in large quantities. The day of the anticipated opening of the play soon arrived. In the afternoon, the townspeople surrounded the central square. This was under the situation where Roland demolished the surrounding old buildings and doubled the area of the square. In order to promote the play, Roland began to issue an announcement a week in advance to notify the people, and also specially ordered the Ministry of Agriculture to send people to the outer residential area of the town to mobilize the serfs to watch the play. As the Lord, Roland obviously had the best viewing position. In the direction of the performance stage, Carr set up a temporary wooden stage. The wooden stage had a total of 3 rows and could accommodate about 100 people. Roland sat in the middle of the 3rd floor. On one side of him was the Witch Union, next to him was Anna, and on the other side was the merchant group, with Marjorie being the closest. The 1st and 2nd floors were mostly officials and apprentices of the city hall. In order to ensure safety, the people around the wooden stage were all soldiers of the First Army. While they watched the play, they separated the prince's position from the civilians. At this time, it was about 4:00 in the afternoon. The scorching sun had already faded. Coupled with Vendi's cold wind from time to time, all the people on the viewing platform enjoyed the VIP treatment. Amidst the applause of the crowd, the actors stepped onto the stage one by one. To be honest, Roland had no idea what the final result of this premiere would be. After handing over the script to Irene, he no longer cared about this matter. Whether it was recruiting actors or rehearsing, she and Philin were all busy. Now that he thought about it, a newcomer in the theater, who only appeared on the stage once, how much experience could she have? Moreover, the friends she found were probably all minor actors who couldn't get a chance to perform in the theater in Longsong Stronghold and went to border town. In other words, this was a new play directed, choreographed, and implemented by a new team. Fortunately, Roland didn't mind failure. This play was not for the ticket income, nor was it to promote how excellent the script was. This was an enlightenment performance, and it would be performed more than once. If they didn't perform well this time, they would improve next time. "I know why you're so confident in this performance," Marjorie suddenly exclaimed. "You actually invited Miss May." Roland was stunned. "Who?" "May. Don't tell me you don't know about this." "God, before I came here, I saw her performance in King's City." Marjorie smacked her lips. "She's the best in both the understanding of the role and the creation of emotions. A Prince's Search for Love won countless tears. Even Cajun Fells was full of praise for her." "Who's Cajun Fells?" Roland rummaged through his memory and found that he had no impression of this name at all. "Your Highness, are you really from King's City?" Marjorie blinked. "If I may ask, who is the person you're most familiar with in King's City?" "Except for the people in the court." "Magic Hand Yorko," Roland blurted out. He immediately realized that something was wrong. "Oh." Karina gave him a meaningful look. "The most famous playboy. I heard that women can't forget him with just his hands." "I see. With just his hands?" Anna tilted her head. "Why?" Chapter 189. There were no curtains, no speeches, only a wooden board separated the stage from the preparation room. It was the first time for a group of people to perform a play on such a simple stage, and it was also their first official performance in their lives. The story takes place in the capital of a kingdom. In the outer city, there is a beautiful and kind-hearted girl. As the narration sounded, Irene slowly walked onto the stage. She was wearing a dirty gray robe, her hair was messily coiled on top of her head, and her face was covered with black dust. Swinging the broom in her hand, she carefully swept the floor, and from time to time bent down, using the corner of her robe to wipe off the dirt that was difficult to remove. After several days of rehearsal, Irene had already memorized the entire plot process. The story was very simple. A commoner woman who had lost her mother was bullied at home, but because of her kindness, she saved a witch. The witch used her magic to send her to the ball held by the prince, and she fell in love with the prince at first sight. However, her magic time was limited, so she had to leave the ball in a hurry, leaving behind a crystal shoe in her panic. In order to find this beautiful girl, the prince did not hesitate to search the whole city, and finally found her in the outer city, after which the two lived happily together. The story was simple and easy to understand, and the plot was different from the usual description of the love between the princess and the prince. Instead, the commoner woman relied on her good nature to obtain the help of the witch, and finally won the prince's favor. As the protagonist of the play, Cinderella, from tolerating the bullying to mustering the courage to resist, was also something that the actors needed to focus on. But Irene never thought that May would actually give the role of the heroine to her. She was very happy that the star of the Western region was willing to perform with her on the same stage, and as the pillar of the Longsong Stronghold Theatre, May had enough pride and confidence to play the leading role in any play, but in Cinderella, she took the initiative to play the role of the leading role's half-sister. This made Irene somewhat unbelievable, until the other side repeatedly stressed that this was a performance for a newcomer, and Irene accepted the role of Cinderella. In the following rehearsals, she worked hard. Not only did she practice every scene repeatedly, but she also pestered May, who shared the bed with her, to teach her acting skills after the candles were extinguished. She didn't want to let May down. Fortunately, Irene was not inexperienced. Looking at the eyes of the countless people below the stage, she relaxed her body and repeated the content that she had practiced repeatedly. So far, she felt that she was in good condition and did not make any mistakes. When Rosia, who was playing the role of the witch, was so nervous that she forgot her lines, she even encouraged her with her eyes. "I'll share half of the oatmeal with you. Don't eat too fast, it's still hot. Thank you for your kindness, little girl. I will repay you." When Rosia walked backstage with a hunched back, the crowd applauded one after another. This made Irene feel relieved. One had to know that forgetting one's lines during an official performance in the fortress's theater was an intolerable mistake. The nobles would only jeer at the actor instead of applauding him. At this moment, May appeared. This scene was the first conflict between the mean elder sister and Cinderella. Under the elder sister's bullying and humiliation, the latter could only hide in the basement and cry in front of her mother's portrait. But when the other party stood in front of her, Irene suddenly found that the atmosphere on the stage had suddenly changed. She was no longer the silent star of the theater during rehearsals. She had become the ruler of the stage. Her arrogant manner, perfect body movements, and undisguised contempt in her eyes made Irene feel a strong sense of oppression. "Hey, look, who is this? What are you thinking about instead of working in broad daylight? You pitiful thing that no one wants. Hurry up and clean my gown. Don't be so clumsy. This is a formal dress for a banquet. You can't afford to damage it." May pushed her fiercely. Originally, Irene should have pretended to fall, but under the other party's cold eyes, she couldn't help but take a few steps back and accidentally tripped herself. Without any buffer, she fell to the ground. Her elbow hit the stage floor, and a burst of burning pain came. Really a useless waste. May no longer looked at her. Instead, she walked to the center of the stage, faced the silent square and the crowd, and began her monologue. As expected of Miss May. Marjorie lowered her voice and praised. With a few simple words, she attracted everyone's attention. This role has been completely brought to life by her. Well, she's really good. Roland nodded. But this person is too good. The disgust and contempt she showed for Irene seemed real. Even sitting here, he could feel her ruthlessness. The emotional appeal could be seen from the expression of the whole audience. But, she was not the main character. Irene's originally good performance suddenly lost a lot of color in front of her. If this went on, I'm afraid that the supporting role would be superior to the main character. Irene was a little stunned. She knew she had to stand up quickly. May's monologue was mainly to express her desire for the prince and to lead to the palace ball. It wouldn't last long. She had to leave the stage before the scene changed. But the familiar feeling from the past rehearsals had left her. For the first time, Irene found the stage so strange. Is this all you've got? It wasn't until May finished her performance and walked past her. The fluttering hem of her dress slapped her face that she came back to her senses. The other party didn't speak, but Irene read this sentence from the Star of the West's cold eyes. Irene knew that May couldn't pull her up. The two of them were like fire and water. Once they reached out, the play would be over. She bit her lips, and the smell of iron overflowed from her lips. Looking at the back of May disappearing behind the partition, she wanted to get up and leave, but Gate and Sam had already trotted up with the props. Sam also took the opportunity to place the barrels in front of her and whispered, "The next scene is still yours. Go on, come on." Irene knew that this was against the rules, but indeed, she had missed the opportunity to go on stage. So the audience saw a wonderful scene change. Cinderella sat motionless on the stage, and the surrounding scene changed from the living room to the basement. The beautiful round table and wooden chair changed into barrels and rattan baskets. The people carrying the props went back and forth, but the girl remained in the same position, as if frozen in time. The next plot was Cinderella trapped in the basement, and the witch appeared to rescue her. Not only did she give her beautiful clothes, but she also summoned a carriage that could directly take her into the palace. Remember, the time can only last until midnight. You must leave the palace before the dragon bell rings. Otherwise, the clothes and the carriage will disappear. Ah, yes. I know, thank you. At this time, Irene still hadn't gotten rid of her bewilderment. Previously, when she was hiding in the backstage and secretly watching May's performance, she only felt that this woman was very free and at ease, and in front of more than 1,000 spectators, she only felt that this woman was very powerful. But when she stood on the stage and faced this bright star, she completely understood the other side's amazing acting skills. Is this the distance between a star and a flower? Chapter 190. The prince actor is quite handsome, but his expression is too stiff, Marjorie said. Ah, it's him. Roland was a little surprised. The Light of Dawn, the first knight of the Western region, is now a teacher in Border Town. He's not an actor. Not an actor. The businesswoman was surprised. Then how can he go on stage? We have limited manpower, he said with a smile. Look at the other two. They are the actors who moved the props for the scene. If they were to play the prince, they would not be able to make Cinderella fall in love with them at first sight. You're right. Irene, who had changed into her costume, stood aside and watched May walk to Philin Eltek, put her hand on his shoulder, and dance with him. No, Philin didn't know how to dance. He was just guided by May's exquisite dancing skills and swayed with her steps. This part didn't appear in the rehearsal. Irene realized that this was an impromptu performance by May. The elder sister tried to seduce the prince in every possible way, but the prince remained unmoved. He only maintained a polite conversation with her until Cinderella appeared in front of the prince. Only then did the prince shift his attention to this beautiful woman with bright eyes and white teeth. Irene knew that as long as she walked over, Philin would leave May aside according to the script and play out the love story of him falling in love with her at first sight. However, anyone could see that her current muddle-headed appearance was not attractive to May at all. Why would the prince leave her, who was more beautiful and moving, and choose her, who was ordinary? At this moment, she saw the look that Philin cast at her. There was helplessness, comfort, encouragement, and love. Irene felt that the stage suddenly quieted down. The laughter, cheers, and discussions of the townspeople disappeared. Her friends in the theater also disappeared. Only May, Philin, and herself were left on the stage. That's right, her acting skills were far inferior to the star of the Western region. So, should she just give up and admit defeat? No, a voice in Irene's heart whispered to her. No, she wanted to continue acting. This was a rare chance for her, or rather, her last chance. If she gave up, she might not get another chance like this again, to be able to compete with such an outstanding actress on the same stage. She also wanted to become a person like May, who could stir up the atmosphere of the audience with her every movement, and let everyone's focus gather on her. "I'm sorry, May," she said in her heart. If the prince was an actor in the theater, she wouldn't even have the courage to compete. It was almost impossible for her to defeat the star of the West with her acting skills now. But he wasn't. "He is the light of dawn, my lover," Irene thought. "Please forgive me for being shameless, I don't want to lose to you in front of him." The stage disappeared, and in front of Irene was a wheat field. The long applause and cheers continued until the end of the narration. The actors bowed and left the stage, and everyone did not stop applauding. "This is really wonderful," Marjorie clapped. "I thought that the little girl would be completely overwhelmed by May, but I didn't expect that she would be able to come back in the end, and I don't know if it was an illusion, but her interaction with the prince was more natural than May's, as if she really should be with the prince." "It is indeed surprising," Roland nodded. Irene at the back was like a different person. It should be her own performance, so she could maintain her confidence under the aggressive May. In a short time, the prince turned back into her husband, and got rid of the shackles of the stage. This ability is also very good. In time, presumably, she can also become a rising star. In addition, the bell and the gun salute created by Echo were also perfect, because there was no rehearsal. Roland only told her to play freely before the play began. He did not expect the effect to surprise him. Lost. May closed her eyes. She tried hard to let the role of the prince be played by Philin Eltek, in order to leave a deep impression on him on the stage she was best at. She used her acting skills to completely defeat Irene, in this way to show him the gap between Irene and herself. For this, she did not hesitate to stay in the town for nearly a week, rehearsing the play with some actors she usually would not look at. After such a long delay, she was afraid that when she returned to Longsong's stronghold, the theater owner would not be as enthusiastic as before. And the most ridiculous thing was, even on the stage, she did not completely defeat Irene. She did not lose to the other party's acting skills, but to the other party's love. In this case, it was time to let go. May took a deep breath, changed her clothes, and took the lead to leave the preparation room with a straight face. Just as she walked down the wooden ladder from the stage, a man suddenly came up to her. He was also tall and handsome, wearing a shining silver armor, should be Border Town's knight. The difference between him and the light of dawn was that Philin's smile was always warm, while his raised eyebrows, narrow eyes, and thin lips seemed arrogant and indifferent. "What's the matter?" May frowned. Chapter 191. Perrault took a sip of black tea, leaned back in the soft lord's chair, and took a deep breath. It had been more than 2 months since he took over Longsong's stronghold, and he found that he liked this hall more and more. The stair-like structure allowed him to look down at the officials and attendants standing below from the main seat. This feeling of having power in his hands made him very satisfied. In the first month, some small nobles jumped out to openly question him, or secretly planned riots and so on. Of course, the people behind the scenes who provoked them were from the elk and wolf families. Perrault followed his father's advice and sent all the nobles without titles or underground rats to the gallows, and the small nobles with titles were imprisoned until their families paid the ransom and expelled from the western region. Thunder implemented this set of measures, and the situation quickly calmed down. After all, except for the Honeysuckle family, the other families were all arrested in Border Town, so it was impossible to openly oppose Perrault's policy. Afterwards, he divided a part of the profits of Longsong's stronghold to compensate the big families for the losses during the arrest, so that all the nobles temporarily formed a relatively stable interest group. Now, 30% of the income of Longsong's stronghold was turned over to Border Town, and 30% of the remaining 70% was used to maintain the city's operation, 20% was used to appease the other great nobles, and the whole territory received the remaining 20%. Now, the portrait hanging behind the Lord's throne was replaced by the Duke Ryan, the fourth prince, Roland Wimbledon, who was looking forward to the day when he could hang his own portrait of Perrault Hull. If he could completely control Longsong's stronghold, his earl's territory and Longsong's stronghold would be connected, becoming a veritable duke's territory. He could also save 50% of the taxes paid to appease the nobles and invest it in Longsong's stronghold's business and trade in exchange for more generous returns. Of course, the premise was that Roland could smoothly ascend the throne and become the king of Greycastle. "My lord," a guard walked into the Lord's hall and handed him a letter. "It's news from Border Town." Hearing the words, Border Town, Perrault immediately sat up straight. He took the envelope and flattened the thin papyrus. From the poor quality of the paper, he could see that the letter came from his informant among the serfs. The result of the battle more than 2 months ago was incredible. Although Perrault did not go there himself, he heard a bizarre story from his father. In order to ascertain the cause of the Duke's defeat, he placed many of his confidants in the hands of the people he sent to the town. They disguised themselves as craftsmen, herdsmen, or serfs, and sent back to the stronghold the news and intelligence they saw. He believed that the other families would do the same. But so far, apart from the 2 people disguised as serfs who still sent new information every month, there was no news from the craftsmen and herdsmen, as if they had disappeared. Did they betray him, or were they killed by the prince after he found out? He shook his head and focused on the secret letter. The contents of the letter were written with charcoal, and the handwriting was crooked, with traces of water in some places. It seemed that it had been written surreptitiously while working. The first paragraph said that an unknown iron tower was being built on the bank of the Redwater River. The top of the tower was piled up with a huge iron pot, 3 of which had already been erected, each of which was close to the height of the stronghold wall. The blacksmiths seemed to have completed the production of the iron tower in the town, and when they arrived at the river, they had already completed the tower. Then the soldiers of the First Army would erect a barrier around the iron tower, and the next day, it would magically be erected. Construction, it's this word again, Perrault thought. The last secret letter was also like this. Looking at the information, it seems that the prince is constantly building the town. Last time it was roads and bridges, and this time it is building the iron tower. Does His Highness want to spend all the golden dragon that he plundered from the stronghold castle? Moreover, the purpose of the iron tower is still unknown. It must be known that the spy hidden among the serfs is not a real serf, but an experienced and knowledgeable guard. If it was a sentry tower or an arrow tower, he would certainly be able to see it at a glance. Probably because the iron tower has not been completed yet, it is not easy to judge. Perrault shook his head. Maybe he will have more detailed information next month. He moved his eyes to the next paragraph. In the letter, it was written that a large merchant fleet stayed at the town's pier for a week and then left to the east, their destination unknown. During the stay, a lot of ore ingots and saltpeter were unloaded from the ship. The purchase of saltpeter was easy to understand. The second month of summer would become very hot, and the castle would need to consume a lot of saltpeter to cool down. It could also be used to refrigerate wine and fruit juice. As a member of the royal family, he certainly did not want to sweat all day long like a farmer in the field. But the purchase of ore ingots made Perrault feel a little surprised. Border Town is an ore-producing area. He remembered that before the months of demons, when he went to the town as a messenger, Prince Roland had exaggerated and said that he would double the total amount of ore sold. But now, not only did he not export ore, but he also wanted to import ore ingots. Thinking of the iron tower that was as high as the stronghold wall, he found that he was becoming more and more confused about what His Highness wanted to do. But when Perrault read the last paragraph of the secret letter, he suddenly froze. In the last 2 weeks, Border Town has held several open-air theatrical performances in the square. They don't charge tickets, the names of the plays are unheard of, and they even encourage the serfs to watch. What surprised him the most was that among the performers, the star of the Western Territory, Miss May, had disappeared recently. What's going on? The disappearance of May was a big news in the stronghold recently. Several of the plays that she was supposed to star in were changed, and the nobles left halfway to express their protest. The theater had to issue a notice, claiming that May had left the theater without telling anyone, and her current whereabouts were unknown. As soon as the news came out, the theater-loving nobles of the Western Territory suddenly went into an uproar. In the end, she ran to Border Town. There is no theater there. And to perform for civilians and serfs. Perrault could not imagine such a scene for a while. In his impression, Miss May was not an approachable actress. After thinking about it again and again, he decided to write a letter to His Highness Roland and formally ask him about it. As a theater enthusiast, he hadn't seen the wonderful performances of the star of the Western Territory for a long time, and even the opportunity to invite Shirley had decreased a lot. Since the play was performed in the town square, it was not surprising that it was seen by a peddler. It just so happened that this peddler came from Longsong Stronghold, so the news had reached his ears. Thinking about it this way, it should not expose the hidden guards among the serfs. Just as Perrault was about to let the attendants draft a letter, a knight quickly walked into the hall and said in a hurry, "My lord, the guards at the East Gate Watchtower have found a night team approaching the stronghold." "Night? Can you tell where they came from?" He suddenly stood up. Chapter 192. There were about 50 people, all dressed in armor, shining in the sun. There were 4 flags in the team, 3 of them were the flag of the royal family of Greycastle, the Twin Spears Tower flag, and the last one was the flag of the Horse Head Tower flag. After thinking for a while, he recognized that it should be the symbol of the Hawes family of the northern region. One of the knights' team walked out and shouted, "I am Leman Hawes, the messenger of King Timothy. I bring the resolution of King's City, please lower the drawbridge." "Where's the proof?" Perrault asked loudly, poking his head out. The other side took a bow and arrow from his back, tied a paper roll to the arrow, and directly shot it to the top of the city wall. The guard next to him immediately picked up the arrow. Perrault unfolded the parchment and saw that the bottom of the document was faintly inlaid with crisscrossing gold threads, and the lower right corner was stamped with the royal seal of Wimbledon. It was indeed the messenger of the new king. "Lower the drawbridge, open the door." Perrault took a deep breath. He had already roughly guessed the content of the so-called King's City resolution. It was most likely related to Roland Wimbledon. Since the other side was not a fake, he had no reason to refuse the new king's messenger, otherwise it would be equivalent to making an enemy out of Greycastle King's City. Once this news spread, the other families would certainly not hesitate to point their spears at the Honeysuckle family territory, and the suppressed undercurrent in the city would instantly rebound. However, Timothy only sent a delegation of 50 people to inquire about the situation, which also confirmed the fourth prince's statement: the new king might not have the time to govern the western region. Since His Royal Highness could even repel the Duke's coalition army of more than 1,000 people, perhaps these 50 people could only return without accomplishing anything. Of course, this news still needed to be reported to His Highness Roland as soon as possible. Thinking of this, he called the previous night, Westeros, you take 3 short-tailed horses, change them all the way, and as soon as possible tell this news to the Lord of Border Town. Just say that Timothy's men have arrived." "Yes, sir." Westeros nodded. Seeing the knight turn around and leave, Perrault sighed, "Let's go down and welcome the new king's messenger." Only when he stood at the city gate did he realize that other than the dozen or so people at the front of the procession who seemed to be in high spirits, the rest of the night looked a little dispirited. Their bodies were hunched as they sat on their horses, as if they would collapse at any time. "Hello, Sir Lehman," Perrault nodded in greeting. "I'm the fortress manager, Perrault Hull of the Honeysuckle family." The word fortress manager made him feel a little awkward. If he was really in charge of the western region and the Duke of Stronghold, he would not have to salute the messenger, nor would he have to greet the messenger at the door. He would only have to wait in the Lord's castle and wait for the messenger to ask for an audience. "I've heard of your name in Coldwind Ridge, Acting Duke." Lehman dismounted from his horse and walked up to him with a smile. "Your western territory is really a strange place." Duke Ryan gathered an army but was unable to capture a small town. Instead, he lost his life. This is rare in Greycastle. Of course, this might be good news for Honeysuckle. Perrault automatically ignored the sarcasm in his words. "How are your subordinates?" "They look a little uncomfortable." "Don't worry about them," Lehman glanced back at him. "They probably haven't acclimatized to the climate after such a long journey. They'll be fine after a short rest. To be honest, this place is too hot. It's the north that's too cold." Since the other side didn't care, Perrault didn't bother to pay attention to this matter. "I'm curious, why did His Majesty's messenger set off from Coldwind Ridge instead of King's City?" "Because His Majesty Timothy is currently in the northern region," he said bluntly. Duke Ace took advantage of the fact that the border guards were weak to create riots in the north. He was suspected of rebellion, so the king had to send troops to suppress the rebellion. Rebellion? Perrault frowned. This didn't make sense. Although the border guards had knight and mercenaries from all over Greycastle, most of the members were still the duke's own subordinates. How could he start a rebellion when his own subordinates had suffered heavy losses? Thinking of the Duke Ryan's letter that he intended to take advantage of this opportunity to annex the northern region, a bad premonition arose in his heart. Could it be that Timothy Wimbledon had the same idea? So what was King City's decision? "A recall order," Lehman said. "His Majesty sent me here precisely because he didn't want to see the western region also fall into chaos. If I remember correctly, as early as the months of demons, His Majesty sent a recall order to Roland Wimbledon, but he still hasn't returned to King's City. The document should have been sent to Stronghold 5 months ago, but His Highness Roland didn't return to Stronghold to take refuge before the months of demons like the previous lords." Perrault paused. At that time, he was in Border Town leading his people to resist the invasion of demonic beasts, so he couldn't immediately return to King's City. "Now it's been almost 3 months since the end of the months of demons," Lehman couldn't deny. "The king sent me to escort him back to King's City." "When do you plan to go to Border Town?" "We'll leave early tomorrow morning." Normally, it would take them 3 days to reach Border Town, but if the knight I sent out traveled day and night, it would only take 1 day and 1 night to deliver the news. In this way, His Highness Roland should be able to make preparations. Perrault thought, "I can only do this much." Leading the delegation to the Stronghold's camp, he stopped and said, "This was originally the Duke's Night Regiment's station. You can rest here for the night, dinner will be sent to you. As for Mr. Messenger," he looked at Lehman Hawes, "the castle will hold a sumptuous dinner for you, please be sure to attend." "Thank you for your generosity, Sir Perrault," the latter said with a smile. After the dinner, Lehman returned to the camp and walked into the central tent. Several of his men immediately surrounded him. "How is the situation?" he asked. "There are people watching all around, and there are nearly 100 troops stationed at the exit, but most of them don't have complete armor, so they should be the city patrol," one of them reported. "It seems that the Lord doesn't trust us." At least the information is correct, and the news I heard from the banquet also confirmed this. Lehman said in a deep voice. After the Duke's defeat, most of the Knight were captured and sent to Border Town, so there are not many elites in Stronghold who can be used in combat. Before arriving here, he had already learned about the situation in Longsong Stronghold. The task given to him by His Majesty Timothy was very simple, that is, to find out the reason for the Duke's defeat, and then take the corresponding measures to seize control of the western region as soon as possible. Those who took the medicine, how are they? They are almost at their limit, another man said. Now as long as they are given the pills, they are willing to do anything. The envoy delegation was just a cover, a team of 50 people, of which only 13 were real Knight, the rest were mercenaries pretending to be Knight. Under the influence of the church's pills, they were now more obedient than hounds, and more ferocious than demonic beasts. This was the key to Lehman's capture of the city gate. According to the plan, another 1,500 militia troops were slowly approaching Stronghold. As long as they opened the gate, the city would fall into their hands. Chapter 193. The play was a great success. In 2 weeks, there were 3 performances of Cinderella, and many people saw it more than once. If the first performance was because of the publicity and notice, then the next 2 performances were completely spontaneous. There were even people who went to the city hall to ask when the 4th performance would be. Such a response made Roland overjoyed. Everyone was completely attracted by the story, and almost no one raised any objections. Why was it a witch who helped Cinderella? Next month, when the Rooster Crows at Midnight would be performed, it would be almost exclusively for the poor people. He didn't know what the serfs would think of the witch who helped them in the play. Another good thing was that the crew settled down in the town and accepted the existence of witches. After the 3 performances, Irene took the initiative to find Roland and asked him why there was a sudden sound accompaniment during the performance, and Roland introduced Echo to her. Under Nightingale's secret observation, although Irene was surprised, she didn't show any disgust or disgust. Instead, she seemed very curious, asking Echo all sorts of questions and making her demonstrate the sound illusion several times. As a result, Echo also joined the crew and became the master of music behind the scenes. In order to avoid accidents, Irene only rehearsed alone with Echo when she needed to match the sound effects, and the rest of the crew didn't know about it. There was no doubt that the next play would reach a new high in the richness of the sound effects. Another good thing was that the castle was about to usher in the era of running water. The towering water tower stood in the castle's backyard. The tower was made of welded iron frames and was triangular in shape. The top of the tower was connected to an iron bucket with a diameter of 2 meters and a height of 3 meters. There was a float valve in the bucket, which could easily control the height of the water. The tower was welded by Anna, and then covered with an anti-rust coating by Soroya. Finally, with the help of Hummingbird, most of the weight was reduced, so that it could be installed on the pre-poured cement base. Due to the height of the castle, the water tower in the backyard was higher than the one by the Redwater River. It was close to 12 meters, almost level with the top of the castle. In order to prevent it from collapsing, Roland also added a wall connection to the water tower, so that the water tower and the castle were connected as a whole. The steam engine was located outside the backyard and used to supply water to the water tower. The water source came from the well in the backyard of the castle. This was the 3rd generation of steam engines, and the biggest improvement was the reduction of noise pollution. Gaskets were installed on every connection point of the steam engine. These light blue gaskets were the same color that Soroya used to paint the sky. They were very soft and tough, which greatly reduced the vibration and noise of the machine. The inside of the cylinder and the edge of the piston were covered with the color of grass to reduce air leakage and improve work efficiency. The parts that were prone to tremors, such as the exhaust pipes, were all replaced with coated hoses. In order to prevent the steam engine from being exposed to the sun and rain, and to further isolate the noise, Roland also specially built a small room around it. The walls of the room were painted by Soroya with a layer of honeycomb paint to act as a porous sound-absorbing material. The actual test results showed that even if it was operated at night, the noise of the machine would not wake up the sleeping people in the castle. However, Roland's attempt to make the steam engine feed automatically failed. His original idea was to use the flyball of the steam engine governor to control the valve of the wooden box. When the steam pressure dropped, the flyball would close and open the valve, allowing the firewood in the wooden box to roll into the furnace. But in this way, the governor must be made very large, otherwise the flyball's weight would not be able to drive the valve. Roland thought about it and decided to give up. The wooden box could only be filled with firewood once, and after it was used up, it had to be filled manually. It would be better to arrange people to fill the water tank with water every day. The last step was to install the water pipes, including faucets, showers, pipes and the corresponding drainage pipes. Because the castle was not like the newly built brick houses in the residential area, these holes were left, and the stone roof and walls made the transformation very troublesome. This step took nearly a week. In order to live a happy life, Roland personally directed Carr to transform a room on the second and third floor into a bathroom. Soroya's new ability once again played a key role. After the drainage pipe was paved with cement, a thin layer of grass was painted on the floor. Not only was it waterproof, but when walking into the bathroom, it was like walking on a grassland. Inspired by this, Roland simply let her paint the whole room. The ceiling was an open blue sky and clouds, the four walls could see the distant valley and green grass, and the four walls of the bathtub were crystal clear, just like a gem. On the day that the water system was put into operation, the prince called all the witches to the bathroom to experience this great result. The water tank in the backyard was already filled with water. He turned on the faucet, and the water gushed out along the pipe. From today on, there is no need to bring water from the well, Roland proudly announced. The bath water also doesn't need to be returned every 3 days, you just need to stand under the shower and pull this switch. Huh? Where does the water come from? Lightning stuck out her tongue and licked the endless water droplets. It's sweet. Maggie stuck out her head from under Lightning and did the same. It's sweet. Roland stopped the third Nana, who wanted to stick her head closer. Anyone who wants to drink water must wait until it is boiled before drinking. The water flowing out from here can only be used to wash hands and bathe. This is the siphon principle, right? Anna looked at Roland, her lake blue eyes sparkling. What is that? Hummingbird raised her hand and asked. Under the training of Teacher Scroll, the witches in the class had now developed the habit of raising their hands and asking questions. According to elementary physics, when the liquid level of two containers is different, the two liquids are connected by a pipe. No matter what the shape of the pipe is, under the action of the liquid's own gravity, there will always be a tendency to keep the liquid level moving. Anna recalled while explaining, our position is lower than the water tower, so the water will constantly flow here. Absolutely correct, Roland praised. To be able to connect the knowledge she learned with reality, she was indeed a genius. What about this? Nightingale curiously pointed to the shower hanging high up. Why does it have so many small holes at the bottom? Roland turned the valve, letting the tiny water droplets spray out, for the convenience of bathing. As long as you stand under the shower, you can easily wash your body. So, you've been tossing and turning in the castle for a week, just to make bathing more comfortable? Lily curled her lips and whispered, you're indeed a noble who loves luxury. Lily. Scroll said, frowning. Chapter 194. Not long after the prince returned to his office, Scroll also followed him in. Your Highness, I'm sorry, Lily, that child, didn't mean it. I don't care, he smiled, she's just a little girl. Only you are so tolerant of us, Scroll sighed. She wasn't like this at the beginning, but after being deceived, it's hard for her to trust ordinary people. Was it before she joined the Witch Cooperation Association? He asked. I remember she joined you only a year ago. Indeed, I found her on the outskirts of Redwater City, Scroll said, "You know, I can feel the existence of magic, and the closer I am, the stronger it is. Although I can't directly see the shape and color of the magic like Nightingale can, it can at least be used to find new witches. So every time I passed through a town, I would disguise myself as a noble lady who wanted to adopt a child, and go to the local shelter or orphanage to look for sisters who might have awakened." She paused. At that time, Lily was locked in a remote town shelter, but when I asked to adopt her, I was refused. The owner of the shelter told me that they only sold adult girls. "Why?" Roland asked doubtfully. "The latest time a witch awakened was before adulthood. Could it be related to this?" At that time, we also felt very strange, so we let Nightingale sneak into the shelter, looking for the books, records and relevant information. Fortunately, the shelter was far away from the town, so we could stay here for a longer time. "Why didn't you take Lily directly?" "With Nightingale's help, it shouldn't be difficult, right?" "Indeed, it's not difficult," Scroll nodded. "In addition to the owner wearing a god's stone of retaliation, there are no other stones or traps in the shelter. But we can't do this, there is a precedent for this kind of thing." "What precedent?" The prince made a cup of tea for Scroll. "Thank you." She took the teacup. "In the beginning, as long as we found a witch, we would forcibly take her away, but an accident happened in Sewanshire, which changed our approach. At that time, there was a young witch who had just awakened, who believed that we were evil. After she was taken back to the Witch Cooperation Association, she didn't listen to our explanation and attacked us. In the end, 2 of our sisters were seriously injured and died, while she was also killed by Kara's death sentence snake. So from then on, we would carefully observe the witch for a period of time to determine her situation and thoughts before taking any action. If the church pursues us too closely, we can only choose to give up." "So, the meeting between Nightingale and Vendi wasn't a coincidence?" "Of course not." Scroll took a sip of tea and shook her head with a smile. "From the time we discovered the existence of Nightingale to the time when Vendi came into contact with her, only a little more than a month had passed. During this time, we also recruited other sisters, such as Red Pepper and Windchaser." At this point, her expression dimmed a lot. "Unfortunately, they were all buried in the barbarian land. If everyone had chosen to settle down in Border Town from the very beginning, it would have been much better." Roland also felt quite regretful. If more than 40 witches of the Witch Cooperation Association had gathered in Border Town, I'm afraid it would have already entered a modern life. "Let's not talk about that." Scroll took a deep breath. "Let's talk about Lily." After searching the shelter and tracking the owner's whereabouts, we discovered a shocking fact: this small country house is neither a real shelter, nor was it built to screen witches. Then what was it for? In order to satisfy the owner's selfish desires. Even if Scroll was a person with good self-restraint, when she said these words, her expression became somewhat gloomy. Every week, the owner would go to the slums of Redwater City, abduct those homeless girls, and deceive them by saying that he was a kind-hearted aristocrat who had opened a shelter in the suburbs, and that there would often be great aristocrats who would disguise themselves and come to choose their adopted daughters. As long as they were chosen, they wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives. Not everyone would be deceived, but, over the past 10 years, there have been hundreds of girls who have gone to the shelter. So many. Roland frowned, "But you said that the shelter's scale is not large." "Hundreds of them are just records in the account book, most of them are dead," she whispered. "In the past 10 years, he has found a total of 3 witches, all of whom were sold to the church. As for the other girls, if they were relatively good-looking, he would also dress them up and sell them to those who needed them. As for the ones that no one cared about, he would kill them in the woods of the shelter." For a moment, the prince didn't know what to say. Suddenly, he felt a pair of hands gently placed on his shoulders from behind. The probability of a witch's awakening is not high, so after deducting the shelter's expenses, the golden dragon that he earned over the years was about 20, according to the account book. But for these 20 golden dragon, nearly 300 people died, and the pits in the woods were filled with corpses. When Kara interrogated him as to why he did this, he unexpectedly said that earning the golden dragon was not his original intention, it was only to maintain the shelter's operation, and that it was also for this reason that he only sold adult women, a witch could be sold for a much higher price than an ordinary woman. His purpose was to enjoy the pleasure of having the power to decide the life and death of these wandering girls. He felt like he was a king. Kara, in a rage, killed him, and when we tried to disperse the group of girls, most of them glared at us, as if we had taken away their chance to be adopted by the nobility. Lily was also like this at first, until Kara took her to the woods behind the small building, where she saw her friend, the lucky girl who had lied about being chosen by the nobility and left the shelter a month ago, as well as several smelly pits. After that, Lily vomited and fainted in Kara's arms. When she woke up, her expression was dull, and there was no spirit in her eyes. Later, under the care of Vendi, she slowly recovered. From then on, she was full of vigilance and distrust towards ordinary people, especially the nobility. Scroll said, "But I believe that she will slowly correct this view. After all, you are also a member of the nobility." So that's how it is. Roland secretly sighed in his heart, after experiencing this kind of thing, to still be able to pull himself together. It can be said that he has a strong will. Scroll picked up the kettle and refilled their cups. After a long silence, she opened her mouth and said, "Your Highness, I have a question to ask you." "What question?" He was startled, and found that Scroll's expression was somewhat serious. "Nightingale, are you also here?" "Well," Nightingale appeared, "do you need me to leave?" "No, you already know about this matter." She shook her head, "Just accompany me to witness it." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.